Welcome to HP FanFiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. After dinner, Harry and Daphne led the other five up the grand staircase to the third floor and down towards the classroom they'd selected. "Aren't you afraid of the painful death the headmaster told us about last Monday night?" asked Hermione. "Huh?" asked Harry, stopping suddenly and turning around. This brought the whole group to a halt. Giving his head a bit of a shake, he asked the Gryffindor girl, "I'm sorry? What were you talking about?" "Last Monday night, just as dinner was about to be served, the headmaster made an announcement," she explained. "He said stay away from the third-floor corridor on the left unless you want to suffer a horrible and painful death." "Why the bloody hell would he say something like that?" asked Harry. "Language, and I have no idea," replied Hermione, "but it's what he said." "All right," he said firmly. "We'll go and check it out after we check out the new clubhouse." "Harry, it's forbidden," said Hermione, shocked. "Not according to what you said, Hermione," replied Harry firmly. "Look at it this way. According to what you just said, it's quite all right for me to go to the third-floor corridor on the left if I actually do want to die a horrible and painful death. Who's to say I don't?" She stuttered. "But—" "Precisely," said Harry. "Dumbledore has been speaking in public for many decades. He's been on the Wizengamot since he was awarded his Order of Merlin First Class. He knows how to string a coherent sentence together. He knows how to say something so it's not misinterpreted. He would not have made it to the position of Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot if he did not have that particular talent. He would not have made it to the position of Supreme Mugwump either." Hermione, as well as a few others in their little group, thought hard about that. "Hermione," tried Harry again. "If he didn't want students to go into that corridor, then he would only have had to place wards up that blocked access. Him saying don't go there without ensuring children can't get in there is akin to waving a red flag to a bull. No, he wants kids to go and have a look. I dare say there's already been a few individuals who have done precisely that. For whatever reason he's got something there he wants someone to find." "Well, that's food for thought," said Daphne, changing the subject. "We've still got a club room to investigate. Shall we?" They all gave a nod as Harry turned back to the direction they were heading and led the way. Not far along the hallway, Harry stopped outside a plain, unornamented door. "And here we are," he said, opening the door. Neither he nor Daphne had yet seen the room after the elves applied their magic to it. However, as the two hosts, he and Daphne waited for the other five to enter the room first, before following them in. The only clue the two had to how good the room looked was by the sounds of appreciation their friends were making. Once inside, he and Daphne had to step around their friends to get a good look at the room. Both were quite shocked by what they found. As expected, the elves had cleaned the room out completely, repaired the fixtures, and refurnished. However, the efforts of the elves went beyond that. The room was given a makeover with a thorough cleaning. The blackboard, not just repaired, was also given a fresh coat of paint. And there was fresh chalk sitting on the chalk shelf directly below the board. The gaslight fittings had all been repaired, cleaned, and polished. Missing lamp covers were replaced. The lights within gave the room a bright appearance. The once bare window now had drapes of a rich blue with gold trim. Desks that looked quite unlike student desks were arranged in a horseshoe shape around the room. Many were of different varieties. Chairs that more resembled armchairs than student chairs were placed at each desk. Again, most were subtly different from the others. However, each chair was trimmed identically in rich blue with a subtle pattern which reminded Harry of paisley. There were about 36 sets of desk and chair arranged this way. In the middle of the floor was a large gold throw rug that almost reached the desks on either side. On each side of the window, but far enough from the window not to appear to be boxing it in, were two tall bookcases. Each bookcase appeared to be 2/3 filled with books. Hermione had already approached the bookcase and was browsing through one of the books. "Harry, these are all mainly on wizarding traditions and etiquette," she said. "This is amazing." Harry was gobsmacked. It was far better than even he could have imagined. Glancing over at Daphne, he could see from her expression she felt the same way. Well, said Tracy, this is, well. Everyone else could only silently agree for a few moments before Daphne said, I guess our etiquette club is really going to happen. Snapping out of his own surprise, Harry said, well, it looks like we're set for about 36 people. I hope that's not too much. Looking up from where she was returning a book to a bookshelf, Hermione said, I think you'll find it be more accurate to wonder if it's enough. You might not get 36 people attending at the first meeting, but once people hear about this place, places will fill fast. If we do, said Daphne, I'm sure we can get the elves to add more desks and chairs. This is one of the biggest classrooms I've seen in the castle, and there's still room to add a second ring of desks and chairs outside of the first. Over at the far side of the room near the wall with the blackboard, Hermione called, Hey, come and have a look at this. The group, curious, walked over and saw Hermione standing in front of another door. It bore a small wooden sign that said office. I don't remember that being there, said Harry. No, I remember there being a stack of old-school furniture in this corner, though, replied Daphne. Well, said Harry, we'd best have a look then. He stepped forward and opened the door. Stepping in, he saw 2 office desks facing each other in the middle of the room. At each was an office chair. Standing against the opposite wall was a large, ornate filing cabinet. Harry walked over and opened the filing cabinet to find it empty. Hello, said a voice. It's glad I am to see someone has decided to make use of this old classroom again, even if you are children. Turning towards the sound of the voice, Harry saw a portrait of a stern man hanging on the wall smiling at him. Hello, he said. We asked Professor Flitwick, my head of house, if we could set up a club to teach mainly Muggleborns about wizarding etiquette and traditions. The classroom out there is what we got. We didn't even know this office was here until the classroom was cleaned up. So I've been informed, young man, replied the portrait, as you seem not to know. This office is provided to be the office for your club. Hearing a noise, Harry turned around and found the others had also come into the room and were having a look around. Wow, said Neville. I bet you didn't expect this. No, we didn't, replied Harry. Turning back to the portrait, he said, And pardon, but what do we call you? Smiling, the man said, I believe you meant to inquire, and to whom do I owe the pleasure? Blinking and blushing a little, Harry replied with a small bow, My apologies. You are, of course, entirely correct. To whom do I owe the pleasure, sir? I am Carwyn Thomaset, replied the portrait proudly. I was a professor here at Hogwarts in the 1800s. What did you teach, Professor? Asked Harry. With a wide smile, the portrait of the ex-professor replied, I taught social studies of the wizarding world. In other words, I taught a lot of what you're trying to accomplish here. That's why I volunteered to hang in here for a while. Volunteered? Asked Tracy. You can do that? Well, it isn't a dictatorship, young lady, replied the portrait. However, when it was learned someone wanted to make a go at setting up a club to teach Muggleborns wizarding life and etiquette, even though it has been attempted before and has failed, I thought I'd volunteer to hang in this office and provide service. That way I can also guide you in your planning of classes and may be able to assist in answering any questions you find too difficult. That is, of course, if you choose to hear my counsel. Your kind offer, Professor, was not anticipated, replied Harry. Professor Flitwick required us to provide a curriculum overview for what we want to do. However, we have not gone into detail for each session at this stage. Speaking up, Daphne said, plus we only anticipate holding 1 meeting a fortnight during school terms, meaning we should only be meeting a total of about 18 to 20 times over the course of each year. Are you sure you won't be bored, Professor? Smiling, the portrait replied, It's good of you to ask, my lady. However, this portrait is only my home frame. I, as are many other portraits throughout the castle, am quite capable of visiting other areas through other portraits. I'll be fine. With a glance at Harry, Daphne said, In that case, Professor, welcome. After saying their goodbyes to the portrait of Professor Thomaset, the group returned to the new club room. You do know, said Neville, once those clever enough come to the first couple of meetings and return to their common rooms, start to tell others about what you two will be teaching in here. You'll very soon get a whole lot more people wanting to come along. Yeah, replied Harry, and if Hermione's right, I'm just hoping we can fit them all in. As the last one out the door, Harry pulled the door closed behind him. "I'll have to see about how I can get a magical lock for that," he mused. "And for the office door, we can't just have people going in there whenever they want." Shortly thereafter, the seven broke to return to their own common rooms. The next morning's breakfast saw many owls for both Harry and Daphne, but none that were booby-trapped. There was even an official letter from the DMLE informing them both that the culprits of the previous morning's mail bombing had been identified and already spoken to concerning their actions. The letter asked Harry how he wanted them to proceed against the perpetrators. Harry responded to the letter stating he wanted the senders of the howlers warned, and that, if they tried anything again, charges would be pressed. He also wrote he wanted the ones who sent the booby-trapped mail, especially the one containing the booby-tuber pass, to be formally charged. While not much may come of the charges, the perpetrators would know not to mess with Harry Potter or his betrothed in future. It sent a message right back. As he and the others were finalizing their breakfasts, Harry felt himself dreading a little his first potions class. It was his first class for the day, and was a double. Breakfast sat heavily in his stomach. Walking down to the dungeons, Harry caught up with Susan and Hannah and asked, "Ladies, are there any students in our soon-to-be oh-so-enjoyable session of brewing potions who has yet to find a partner?" Glancing back at him, Hannah replied, "Sorry, Harry, I wouldn't know." "Me neither," replied Susan. "I spent both classes last week keeping my head down and doing the work," said Hannah. "The man scares me." "Me too," said Susan. Harry smiled. "Ladies, thank you for the information," he said. "I can see I'm in for a fun-filled morning with the greasy bat of the dungeon." Harry and the girls arrived about 5 minutes before Snape opened the door and barked, "Inside! Take your seats, cauldrons and scales out." Harry waited back until everyone else filed in. He waited until he saw a vacant seat next to no one. "Oh, yes," thought Harry. "There's only 9 in the first-year cohort for the Puffs." So one of the Puffs sat with the spare claw. Looking around, Harry spied a vacant station and made his way to it. "At least on my own I can just make the stupid potion and not be held back while someone reads and translates the recipe," he thought as he brought forth his potions equipment out of book bag, together with the book's magical drafts and potions by Arsenius Jigger and the one Daphne recommended he use as the reference guide. He didn't actually need either book on the bench at his workstation, having already memorized both, but having them on the bench implied he needed them. While Harry was setting his book bag on the floor next to his stool, Snape ascended his little dais, spun on the spot, glared at Harry and said, "Ah, Mr. Potter, our newest celebrity, tell me, Mr. Potter, what would I get if I added root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" "A soggy mess," replied Harry with a shrug. "However, they're 2 of the main ingredients in the draught of the living death, sir, a third-year potion." "Where would you look if you wanted to find a Bizarre?" asked the surprised potions master, not expecting a correct answer. "In the stomach of a goat, sir," replied Harry. "If ingested quickly enough after being poisoned, a Bizarre is a fast and effective way of curing most such poisonings." "And what, pray tell, is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "The colour and shape of the flower, sir," replied Harry. "They're 2 variations of the same family of plant." "Very good, Mr. Potter," said Snape with no sign of a sneer. "It appears you have been studying ahead. I wonder if you can keep it up." Snape then turned to the class and said, "For today you will be making burn salve paste. Madame Pomfrey has informed me her supplies are running low. For those few who make a halfway decent batch, you may find your fellow students using what you've made sometime during the year. Jars will be offered by me at each station that manages to get something as simple as this right. The instructions are on page 82 of Jiggers and on the board." With an almost negligent wave of his wand, the instructions for the salve appeared on the board. "Get to work. You have 90 minutes. Harry waited a few moments as he saw other students go to a cabinet off to the side and collect supplies, and followed them. He was soon back at his station with the necessary ingredients. He first used a clean cloth to wipe over the inside of his cauldron, his stirring rod, his scales, the cutting board and the ingredient knife. He could tell that Snape was watching him, but made sure to take his time in ensuring everything was clean. Once he was ready, he began. The potion was a relatively simple one, but was actually an advanced first-year brew. There were a couple of steps that could have proven dangerous if every step was not carried out precisely. However, Harry was not the sort to rush. Rushing just increased the risk, and he had plenty of time. At around the 75-minute mark, Harry looked up and could see Snape staring back at him. When their eyes met, the professor gave a small nod of his head towards the end of Harry's workstation. There, Harry could see an empty jar sitting on a piece of parchment. Reaching across, Harry snagged the jar and brought it to himself. He again drew out his cleaning cloth and wiped the jar and lid inside and out while he read the parchment. It was details of a 9-inch assignment on the uses of hellebore in potion. As hellebore was one of the ingredients in Harry's other book, he figured he could get the assignment knocked over in about an hour. He carefully scooped the slightly yellowish goop out of his cauldron into the jar. Once the jar was full, he screwed the lid into place and placed the jar on his workstation. At that point, Snape came over, picked up his jar, peered at the contents through the clear glass, and nodded his head. Drawing his wand out, the professor caused to appear the words "Burn Savard" on the side of the jar and on the lid. Turning to Harry, he quietly said, "Clean up your workstation, and you may leave quietly," before he carried the jar with him back to his desk. It only took Harry a few minutes to clean everything back up, carrying his cauldron, stirring rod, cutting board, and ingredient knife to the sink, and returning the unused ingredients to the cabinet. Once done, he quietly left. He wondered where the looming, sneering and taking of points for blinking too loudly were that other students had told him about. For all he looked, Harry couldn't see it. Knowing he now had a break until lunch, Harry made his way to the Ravenclaw common room and on into his dorm. There, he carefully cleaned his scales before packing them back away in his trunk, and used the opportunity to grab his Transfiguration text for the first class after lunch. Grabbing his Transfiguration text, A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, Harry walked down to the Great Hall and sat at the Ravenclaw table. He was pretending to read through it while munching on an apple when he was joined by Susan and Hannah. "Harry," began Hannah, "how on earth did you manage to get that burn salve made so fast when there was just you working?" "By thinking about what I needed to do and doing it," replied Harry. "I simply went through each step of what needed to be done and organized myself so that neither I nor the potion was sitting idle at any time." "Well, it sure looked like you impressed the hell out of Professor Snape," said Susan. "He was watching you like a hawk and taking notes." "It was also the most calm potions class of the 3 we've had," said Hannah. "It took me almost half an hour before I realized I was actually enjoying myself." Nodding, Susan said, "He didn't sneer at anyone, he didn't yell, he didn't take points for silly reasons, he didn't hover over anyone, he just moved around the class watching everyone and didn't say a word while we were working." "Yeah, but most of the time he was walking around, he was only watching Harry," said Hannah. "It was like he was stalking his prey." Harry just snorted with laughter. "Then it appears I disappointed him by not doing anything wrong." "No," said Susan, contradicting him. "It was more like he was waiting for you to make a mistake. However, when he figured out you weren't going to, he began to watch what you were doing right. That's when he returned to his desk, pulled out the parchment, and began to write down some of the things you were doing. So he noticed I wasn't following the exact steps of the recipe," said Harry. "I did things in a slightly different order." Recognizing the look Hannah was giving him, he said, "I don't mean I mixed in the ingredients differently. I mean I prepared the ingredients in a different order. I made better use of my time. If Snape was writing down what I was doing, I think that's what he was writing down. If you think about it, it makes sense he'd do that," he said. "Not only does he teach, he's the school's potions master. That means he's responsible for providing potions for the infirmary. Something like I was doing that would save him time would be like gold to him." After an afternoon class on Transfiguration, again with the Puffs, Harry and the gang headed for the library to clear away their homework. They were joined by Daphne, Tracy and Neville not long after arriving. "Did anyone notice the schedules are up for first flying lessons?" asked Neville as soon as he sat down. "Flying lessons?" asked Hermione. "On brooms, right?" "Yes," Hermione replied Daphne. "On brooms." Nodding, Neville said. We're second up with the Slytherins at 3:30 p.m. on Thursday, Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw at 2 p.m. immediately before us. And after lunch, I take it these lessons are mandatory? Asked Harry, remembering Daphne and Astoria taught him the basics of riding a broom the day before they boarded the Hogwarts Express. Yeah, and I'm not looking forward to it, replied Neville a little dejectedly. I don't like riding brooms. My Uncle Algy tried to teach me the basics and I was pants at it. Once you get the basics, it's actually a whole lot of fun, said Tracy. It took me a while to get the hang of it, but once I did, I now think it's an enjoyable way to spend a few hours on a warm day. Anyway, said Hermione, homework. With a bit of good-natured ribbing of the driven girl, the group were soon researching and writing assignments. At dinner, the group decided to sit at the Slytherin table, something they hadn't done for a while. The group were just winding up their desserts when Professor Flitwick walked up and handed Harry a note. Opening it, he found he'd been summoned to the headmaster's office. Professor Flitwick would escort him. Frowning, Harry showed the note to the group. I wonder what he wants, said Daphne. Well, whatever it is, I want witnesses, replied Harry. Care to join me? Why not? She replied. Someone you trust should be there with you. Thinking a bit, Harry asked, Does Wizarding Britain have laws against witness tampering? Frowning, she asked, What's that? It's when someone who is involved as a witness in a forthcoming or running trial is approached by one of the parties involved in the trial, normally the accused, and attempts to sway the testimony of the witness in their favor, he replied. Looking a little shocked, she replied, I'm not sure. Daddy would know. Auntie definitely would, said Susan. Well, I can't really refuse to go because he's the headmaster, said Harry. He may just be wanting to talk to me in his role as headmaster, but anything along those lines should be discussed through my head of house, Professor Flitwick. There should be no reason he would involve himself in that sort of thing unless, whatever it is, couldn't be resolved through my head of house first.
And there's nothing like that you're aware of? Asks Tracy.
No, replied Harry, frowning. Unless it has to do with the club, I think it would be wise for you to join me, Daphne. As do I, she softly replied. Looking at the head table, Harry could see the headmaster already seemed to have left. A few minutes later, the dishes were cleared away, and Harry and Daphne approached Professor Flitwick. Ready to go, Mr. Potter? The professor asked. Yes, sir, replied Harry. Very well, the professor said, hopping down off his chair and walking towards the end of the table. Harry and Daphne met him there, and together they made their way out of the great hall. As they were walking, Harry asked the professor, What is this about, Professor? I have no idea, Mr. Potter, he replied. I only know the headmaster asked me to give you a note informing you he wanted to see you after the meal in his office. This is highly suspect, sir, said Harry firmly. I cannot conceive a valid reason for the headmaster to summon me to his office. He is the headmaster, Mr. Potter, replied the professor. That is irrelevant, sir, said Harry. He is as bound by the rules of the school as myself. Changing the subject, Harry asked, Are you aware he is currently facing trial due to his actions relating to me in the early 1980s? That caused the little professor to stutter his step a little. Yes, of course, Mr. Potter. As I am a prime witness in that forthcoming trial, are you also aware that Albus Dumbledore summoning me to his office to chat could be seen by some parties as an attempt to influence my testimony? Asked Harry. Stammered the professor. No, Mr. Potter, I did not consider that possibility. Then I strongly suggest you do, Professor, said Harry firmly, because you may very well be taking the witness stand yourself over what is happening right here, right now, and over what happens within that office. Do you think it might come to that? The professor half squeaked. The school rules state that when a student is summoned to appear before the headmaster or headmistress, they are to be accompanied at all times by their head of house, replied Harry. That means you're going to be in that office with us for the entire time of the interview. I suggest you be very conscious of what your role in this entails, so that if you are summoned to appear at the forthcoming trial, you will not be seen as guilty of any malfeasance relating to your position within this school. I do not want to see you negatively impacted by this matter, Professor. After hesitating in replying for a few moments, the professor said, So noted, Mr. Potter, and thank you. Harry, with Daphne still on his arm, noted they were walking down a hallway towards a large stone gargoyle. As they were about to stop, the professor said to it, "Lemon drops," and the gargoyle almost nimbly stepped aside. Stepping onto the spiral staircase behind the gargoyle, Harry noticed the stairs start to ascend like a spiral escalator. After a few long seconds, the stairs opened onto a landing outside an ornate wooden door. "Please, come in, Harry," Harry heard called in Dumbledore's voice from the other side of the door. Harry opened the door and allowed Daphne and the professor to precede him through into the office beyond. Harry could see the headmaster sitting behind his desk at the far end of the room. "Ah, Harry, my boy," called the headmaster jovially. "So good of you to come." Before Harry could respond, the old man looked to Professor Flitwick and said, "Thank you for escorting Mr. Potter, Felius. You and Miss Greengrass may go." "Thank you, headmaster," replied the professor. "But I'm afraid that won't be possible. Mr. Potter reminded me of the school rules, where it states that in the event a student is summoned before the headmaster, he or she is to be accompanied by their head of house for the duration of the meeting. I shall be following my duty and remaining." "I see," said Dumbledore, clearly not happy with the response from the professor. "And Miss Greengrass? To what do we owe the pleasure of your attendance?" "Harry is my betrothed, as you well know, headmaster," she replied with a somewhat aloof air. "I have chosen to accompany him, curious as to why he was summoned, with no reason given for said summons." Hesitating only for a moment, Dumbledore gave a dramatic sigh of disappointment and said, "I merely wished to inquire of Mr. Potter how he was faring after his ordeal of a little over a week ago." In a stilted, formal voice, Harry replied, "I am well. Thank you for your inquiry, headmaster. Will that be all?" With another dramatic sigh, Dumbledore said, "Harry, there were quite a few children injured on that night. One of my professors even died. I need to discuss with you what happened. Now please take a seat." He indicated the solitary chair before the desk. "Headmaster," replied Harry, not moving from where he stood. "As you are no doubt aware, it would be rude for a gentleman to take seat while a lady stands." "Of course," replied Dumbledore. With a gesture of his wand, a second seat appeared alongside the first. Harry took a long look at the chairs before turning to Professor Flitwick. "It appears, Professor, the headmaster expects you to take care of your own arrangements to sit." Harry then guided Daphne to a chair before taking the other. "Now, Harry, I need you to step me through what happened that," began the headmaster before Daphne interrupted him. "Excuse me, headmaster," she firmly said, "but I was not aware my betrothed has given you leave to use his first name in so off-handed a manner. You are aware, no doubt, that to do so without leave is high insult." Yes, Miss Greengrass," stuttered the headmaster. "I meant no disrespect. I was, of course, Mr. Potter's magical guardian for almost 10 years, and in all that time spent no more than about an hour of time with him," she interrupted again, "and even then, that was when he was but a small infant. I hardly see how that gives you leave to disrespect him now." Though the old man's expression didn't change, Harry noticed how his eyes suddenly appeared to go flat. The twinkle that was there had now gone. "Again, my apologies, Miss Greengrass, Mr. Potter," he said before rearranging himself more comfortably in his seat. "Now, about that night, please step me through what happened in your own words." "No, thank you, headmaster," replied Harry in a cool tone. "I do not wish to relive that night. If there's anything you want to know, it will be covered in the extensive report held by the DMLE for which you, I believe, have access." "I really wanted to hear it in your own words, Mr. Potter," said the headmaster, eyes twinkling away again. "And, as I've already clearly told you, I have no wish to relive that night," replied Harry firmly. "I'm afraid I must insist, Mr. Potter," said the headmaster just as firmly. "Headmaster," spat Harry, starting to lose his temper, "you don't give a flying rat's arse what you insist upon. You don't seem to understand you have no authority to make such an insistence, and expect it to be obeyed. Your incredible level of hubris has apparently blinded your cognizance to reality." Dumbledore stared back with a look of stunned shock. "For someone who carries themselves as the so-called leader of the light, your actions as they relate to me over the past decade identify you as little more than a nascent Dark Lord." ranted Harry. "How anyone could possibly think that kidnapping a defenseless, recently orphaned infant from their rightful guardian, before then dumping said infant on a doorstep far from his rightful home, in the middle of a cold autumnal night, was not an evil and despicable act, frankly defies rational thought. No, Headmaster, it is I who should be doing the insisting here. And I insist you tell me just what the bloody hell you thought you were doing?" Throughout Harry's rant, Dumbledore sat there unmoving. His eyes were wide and his skin tone pale. After a long few seconds, Dumbledore's whole body seemed to collapse in upon itself. His chin dropped towards his chest. Looking back up and taking a deep breath, Dumbledore said, "What I did was for the greater good. Placing you with the sister of your mother and her family meant you could be hidden safe behind blood wards. The sacrifice your mother made that saved your life on that night could be transferred to the home of your aunt and her family. You were safe there." "Bullshit," yelled Harry. "Has it utterly slipped your mind I was beaten and abused there? You've seen the evidence. You know the truth. I was not safe there." "The blood wards protect you from Voldemort's followers," tried Dumbledore. "They protected you from those in the wizarding world who meant to do you harm. I did what I did for your protection, and did nothing to protect me from those outside the wizarding world, from my own so-called family," snarled Harry. "You claimed magical guardianship over me, Dumbledore. It was your claimed responsibility to ensure I wasn't being mistreated while housed with the Dursleys. You never checked up on me. You failed in your duty, something for which I pray you will answer come Monday." "Harry, Mr. Potter, I'm afraid you're too young to understand." "Too young, you say?" cut in Harry. "Then how about the counsel of ones even wiser than you? One of this planet's greatest philosophers, a man who is still well known and read these 2,000 years later for his wisdom, Plato of ancient Greece said, 'This, and no other, is the root from which a tyrant springs. When he first appears, he is a protector.' And a great man of the early part of this century, Clive Staples Lewis, an author and an academic like yourself from one of the greatest establishments of learning in the world, said, 'Of all the tyrannies, a tyranny exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It may be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity may at some point be satiated, but those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience.' The type of person both great men were speaking about, Dumbledore, was you. Your so-called greater good is no more than you lying to your own conscience, attempting to justify yourself an excuse for your self-aggrandizement. I'm fully aware, Dumbledore, there are a great many people out there who believe you can do no wrong. However, as Mahatma Gandhi, a famous Indian philosopher, once said, an error does not become truth by reason of multiplied propagation, nor does truth become error because nobody sees it." After glaring back at the ashen-faced, silent headmaster for a few more moments, Harry said, "Too young to understand, you say? I understand far more than you give me credit." He turned to Daphne and said, "Come, my lady, I believe it's time we take our leave." He stood and assisted Daphne to stand alongside him. Moving aside from the chairs on which they sat, he turned to Professor Flitwick and said, "Thank you for your attendance. This evening, Professor, my lady and I will be leaving. And just so you know, Albus, I'll be reporting to Madam Bones, acting in her role as prosecutor, that you sought to interview me in private this night," he snarled. "And as it is highly likely I'll be a witness for the prosecution against you come Monday, she may wish to press even more charges against you for what could easily be perceived as witness tampering." That clearly startled the headmaster. It was obvious he hadn't thought of that. Professor Flitwick gave a small, shocked but curt nod before hopping down off a small stool he'd conjured and led them out of the office. None looked back. "You're going dark, Harry," called the headmaster, almost as an afterthought. Stopping for a moment, Harry turned back and said, "I was physically and mentally abused in that house, headmaster for nigh on 10 years. It was all I ever knew, all I ever expected. That can change a person. It changed me. I'm not going dark, headmaster. I'm already dark, and it's all because of you and your interference in the wishes of my parents." He then turned back to the door and left with the other two. After they'd left, Professor Snape stepped out of the private quarters off the office. He walked across to a tall cabinet and, after opening one of the doors at the top of the cabinet, drew out a bottle of fire whiskey. He carried the bottle back to the desk. After conjuring 2 tumbler glasses on the edge of the desk, he poured a healthy measure of the fire whiskey into each glass. Still without uttering a word, he picked up 1 glass and placed it before the headmaster. The other he picked up for himself and moved to sit in the chair Daphne had recently vacated. He waited while sipping from the glass. After a few more moments, Dumbledore softly asked, "Did he speak the truth, Severus? Have I been lying to myself all these years?" "That is for you to decide, Headmaster," came back the calm reply. "As I have told you in the past, the boy is an attention-seeking brat." "He most certainly is not, Severus," snarled the headmaster. "If you saw what I saw during the trial of his aunt and uncle last Monday, you would hang your head with shame for that remark." "Now what did you find out?" grumbled the old man. "His mind is fully occluded," replied Snape. "If I attempted to break through his shields, he would have instantly known of the attempt." "I see," replied the old man. "That is troubling and surprising in one so young," said Snape. Out in the hallway leading away from the stone gargoyle, Daphne quietly asked, "Is it true, Harry? Have you gone dark?" Harry gave her hand a pat where it rested in the crook of his elbow. "No, but it's sure going to mess with his head while he tries to think it through." Daphne gave a small chuckle in response. 2 days later, Harry was out on the castle lawns near the Dark Tower with the first-year Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs. Madam Hooch had laid out 20 brooms side by side on the ground roughly 4 feet apart. As Harry walked out onto the grass, he saw that many of his fellow students had already arrived. "All right, you lot," called Madam Hooch. "I want you to each stand alongside a broom with the broom on your right. Move now." Harry stood between Justin Finch-Fletchley and Hannah, with Susan on the other side of Hannah. "Place your hand out over your broom, palm down," commanded Madam Hooch. And with a firm and commanding tone, "Order!" Doing as instructed, Harry held his hand out over his broom and called, "Up!" The broom leapt up from the ground, and the broom handle smacked him in his palm. The surprise of it caused him to teeter a little in place. While Harry felt the magic of the broom thrum through his hand, he looked around. He could see Justin trying to order the broom that lay twitching on the grass next to him to rise to his own hand, and he could see both Hannah and Susan had, after a couple of attempts, managed to get theirs to rise enough to be grabbed. Harry turned to Justin and quietly said, "It knows you're afraid of it, Mr. Finch-Fletchley. Relax. Let your magic flow through your hand as if you're casting a Luma's charm. Just let it flow." Justin gave him a grateful smile and returned his attention to his hand and broom. "Up," he calmly commanded, and the broom leapt off the grass into his hand. With at first a look of shock, he turned to Harry with a wide smile. Harry didn't know Madam Hooch was paying attention to what he'd been saying to Justin until he heard her call, "Good coaching, Mr. Potter. 5 points to Ravenclaw." Turning to face back forward, he smiled at Madam Hooch. The witch took one last look around and said, "For those who have not yet mastered commanding your broom to come to your hand, you may practice it later. For now, I want you to pick it up and hold it in your right hand." Out of 20 students, about half a dozen had to manually pick their brooms up. "Now, I want you to straddle your broom like this," she said, demonstrating. Once everyone had done the same, she said, "Now give a gentle push off the ground and hover in place." With a gentle nudge of his toes, Harry rose into the air and hovered about 5 feet up. Others joined him along the line. He knew that, though doing something like just rising and hovering looked easy, it was actually quite difficult. It was far easier to keep momentum going, similar to riding a bike. Looking to his left and down, he noticed Justin would get the push off the ground right, but would immediately nose his broom forward, forcing it back to the ground. Harry dropped down and said, "Push off and hold, Mr. Finch-Fletchley. Don't push down on the nose of the broom so hard or at all until you're at height." Justin gave him a grateful nod and, with a frown, tried again. This time he rose before he suddenly started to descend again. However, he caught the drop before he returned to the ground by pulling back up on the handle. He rose to bob in place alongside Harry. With a grin he said, "Some brooms can be a little touchy to control, but once you understand its vagaries, it'll come more naturally for you. Now, controlling the broom is as much about steering and guiding it with your magic as with your hands and your seat. Feel the broom and guide it. Before long, Madam Hooch had them circling in ever-expanding circles, with weaves thrown in. They reversed course a couple of times, and even performed a couple lazy figure-eights, but it wasn't long before they were back on the ground. As soon as they were dismissed, Justin man-hugged Harry. "Thank you, Harry," he said. "I don't think I'd have been able to do that if it wasn't for you." "I'm sure you'd have managed, Mr. Finch-Fletchley," he replied. "You're far too determined not to succeed at something you want to excel in." "Maybe," he replied, "but you did make it a lot easier for me." As they walked back to the castle, they were passed by the Gryffindors and Slytherins coming the other way. Harry gave Daphne a big smile, which she returned as they passed. Later that afternoon, the group met in the library. Looking around, Harry noticed they were 3 short. "Where's Neville, Hermione, and Tracy?" he asked. As the only one of that group not missing, Daphne replied. "Neville's broom went wonky and he ended up falling off it and breaking his wrist. Straight after the lesson, Tracy and Hermione went to the infirmary to check up on him. Neither have come back yet." "If Neville did break his wrist, then he's going to be in there overnight," said Susan. "Skilligrew potion tends to be quite uncomfortable while it works, and most healers prefer the patients to stay in overnight in case there's complications. Malfoy and Weasley managed to earn themselves detentions during the lesson," continued Daphne. Remember Neville received from his grandmother at breakfast." The group nodded. "Well, he had it on him when he lost control of his broom. Sometime during the time his broom was flinging him about the sky, he managed to drop it. Malfoy found it after Madame Hooch left with Neville to take him to the infirmary, and Malfoy tried to make a big thing out of it. Remember how Malfoy was on the train, his snooty attitude?" she asked. Again nods with a couple of titters from the girls. "He was going on about Neville's supposedly being such a squib he needed one. Then he said he'd leave it in a tree for Neville to find. They took off up into the air on his broom. Mind you, that was after Madame Hooch told everyone to remain on the ground while she was away. Weasley lost his temper, took to his own broom and soared up into the air after him. The two managed to crash into each other, and both ended up falling about 20 feet to the ground." "Oh dear," said Hannah, while Susan made sympathy noises. "We're either badly hurt." "Apparently not," replied Daphne, "but Professor McGonagall must have been watching from a window of the castle because she was down there like a shot. Both now have detention." Harry snorted in amusement. "Those two are as bad as each other and neither sees it," he said. "One is a bigot because he refuses to see anyone but pure bloods being worth his time, unless you're a half-blood from a noble and most ancient house, and the other is a bigot because if you're a Slytherin, then you have to be evil, and all the truly good witches and wizards are in Gryffindor. They're both equally bigoted, but coming at it from 2 different reasons."
"Honestly, Harry, they're nothing," said Hannah before she stopped suddenly and appeared to think about what she was saying.
"All right, maybe they are," she blushed. "Enough of bigots and their stupid views," said Susan. "What's happening with your etiquette club?" "Well, the house elves have put notices on each house notice board to let people know it's on and when and where to find it," replied Daphne. "Tracy saw the one in the Slytherin common room very soon after it appeared and hid it under other notices. We may have to take everyone without favor, but that's not to mean we have to be so public about the public notices in every house." "Why do that?" asked Susan. "Because we don't want people like Malfoy coming along and belittling, browbeating, and otherwise making a nuisance of him or herself, or anything along those lines," replied Daphne. "He might surprise you, you know," said Hannah. "True," replied Harry. "But as you pointed out, it would be a surprise if he behaved any differently, wouldn't it?" "We know it will become school-wide public knowledge soon enough," said Daphne, "but if we can get a couple of meetings in before someone tries to upset things, then we'll have been able to get off to a good start." "I guess," said Hannah, but without much conviction. Daphne reached across and placed her hand over the other girl's. "We're just being cautious, Hannah." The other girl blushed and nodded. On Sunday afternoon at 4:00 p.m., Harry met with Daphne outside the door to their new clubroom. "Harry, I can't get the stupid door open," she half growled. Sorry, he replied. "I asked a couple of 7th-year Muggle-born claws to place wards and magical locks on the door for me. The password is Muggletum. That drops a very strong colloportus charm that's anchored to the door via tiny runes. Besides, I wanted to be here when you first entered to see what we did last night." Daphne gave him a wry look before turning to the door. In a clear voice, she said, "Muggletum." When she then turned the knob, the door opened easily. She walked in and Harry followed her. He had to walk around her as she'd stopped just inside the door in astonishment at what she saw. Nervously, Harry asked, "Do you like it?" "Harry, it's wonderful," she near squealed before jumping at him for a grapple hug. "Oof," he exclaimed. "I'm glad you like it." Arranged around the walls at a height just above the top of the blackboard was the house crests of all the magical houses in Wizarding Britain, including quite a few Daphne didn't recognize. Each was approximately 2 feet in height, sitting on a white background, with the name of the house on a picture of a stylized furled banner directly underneath, in Old English script. On the back wall was a large chart with the formal name of the houses, followed by the current names of the heads of those houses, their spouse if there was one, followed by the name of the current heir. Where necessary, the title to go with the name was also present. Harry had also found somewhere, or had the elves find them for him, a row of dressmakers' dummies arrayed along the back wall. One was adorned with the robes of the Wizengamot, one in formal lord's robes with a house crest, one in formal ladies' robes with a house crest, one in an old version of the Hogwarts school uniform, and one in the formal robes of the United Kingdom's House of Lords. Stepping back, Daphne continued to look around while Harry grabbed a small wooden sign on a wooden post with 4 small legs from just near the door. Showing it to her, Daphne could see the words Etiquette Club emblazoned in large gold Old English script on its surface. Harry carried it just outside the door into the middle of the hallway and placed it so those walking down the hallway could see it. Stepping back inside, he said, "They should be able to see that from the grand staircase, so they know where to come." As for when this was done, it was last night, he said. "The head boy this year is both a Ravenclaw and a Muggleborn. When I asked for his help, after showing him the material we showed Professor Flitwick, he was real excited to give of his time and skill. He was even the one who convinced the other 7th year, another Muggleborn, to give us a hand. So we planned this over the past couple of days after curfew, and last night the 3 of us came down here and got it all done." "But where did you find the formal robes and the dressmaker dummies and stuff?" she asked. "I've no idea," replied Harry. "I told the elves what I wanted as a general concept, and they said they'd see what was in storage. Apparently there's very little thrown out from Hogwarts. The house elves have somewhere to store everything. Plus, there's some things that are lost or get discarded, and the elves store that stuff too. One of these days I intend to search this place to see if I can find where it all is," he said. "I have a feeling it will be a veritable treasure trove dating back to the time of the founders, and will probably be worth a fortune." "But how did you get to talk to a house elf?" she asked. "I was under the impression the house elves of Hogwarts are seen but not heard. The professor only allowed you one to get the classroom sorted, and that was ages ago." "Ha!" replied Harry. "No one told me that. I just called for one and one came. He told me that the house elves normally don't come when called by a student, but he somehow knew why I was calling and came. They're allowed to do that." "Hello?" called a voice from the door. Turning to look, both Harry and Daphne saw a first-year Gryffindor standing in the doorway looking around. "Come in," said Daphne. "You're the first to arrive." Harry gestured to a ledger he had on the nearest desk with a quill and bottle of ink ready and said, "Please write your name in the ledger and the house you belong to and take a seat where you like." Over the next half hour, over 24 students ranging from new first years up to even 4th years came in. Over 40% were Ravenclaws, about a quarter each were Gryffindors and Hufflepuffs, and there were a couple of Slytherins. Just about all of them oohed and erred at the Decker. They were also joined by the full contingent of the 7, as they were coming to be known. At 4:30 p.m. on the dot, Harry and Daphne moved to the head of the meeting room and waited a few moments to allow the noise to die down. "Welcome, all of you," said Harry. "For those who do not know, my name is Harry Potter, and this most charming, lovely lady with me is Daphne Greengrass. We're the 2 who asked for permission to form this club." Harry gestured to Daphne to take it from there while he picked up a small pile of parchment and started walking around the U shape, handing out a sheet to each. Harry and I were disappointed to learn that many of you, if not all of you, are unaware of the etiquette and traditions of the wizarding world, what they are, why they are, when and how they apply. We also know it's not your fault. The purpose of this club is to work with you to rectify that. Children who have grown up in the wizarding world are quite aware of most of what we're going to help you with. As they've grown up with this, it's a fundamental part of their lives. They live it. However, as Muggleborns, you weren't even aware of the wizarding world until you received your Hogwarts letters. As such, those of us with a lick of sense understand you aren't aware of our etiquette and traditions. Returning to the front, Harry said, however, it is the considered opinion of the populace of the wizarding world that it is your responsibility to make yourselves aware of the etiquette and traditions. So, when you make a mistake relating to one, they hold you responsible for it. They do not consider it their responsibility to teach you what you need to know. Though you may not agree with that viewpoint, they're right. Like me, as I was Muggle-raised, you're pretty much a migrant to this world. To put that into perspective, before you came here, you were living as a Muggle Brit. If someone emigrated into Britain, you would have been of the mind that it was the migrants' responsibility to learn how to live in Britain. They made the choice to come here, so it's their responsibility to fit in. The same applies to the wizarding world and you. Harsh, I know, but no less true. Daphne asked, as an explanation of why it's so important, who here remembers what happened at breakfast last Saturday between Harry and Professor Snape? Almost all sitting before them raised their hands. Good. Now, who here knows what it meant? All but 3 hands went down. Nodding, Daphne asked one of those who had their hand raised on the second question, how did you come to understand what it meant? I went to the school library and found a book about it, said the second-year Ravenclaw. A wise move, said Daphne. Did either of you other two know what it meant as it happened, or did you also have to wait until later to find out? Later, both replied. Again nodding, she said. Then none of you knew at the time that Professor Snape had committed a deliberate major breach of etiquette, and that, as a result of that breach, he could have been lawfully killed for it. Do you? That elicited a few gasps around the room, together with a few talking to others sitting nearby. With a smirk, Harry asked loud enough, it all just became a much more serious issue for all of you, hasn't it? Not expecting a response, he said, what I handed to each of you is a general overview of what we'd like to discuss with you, show you, and where necessary demonstrate for you. We've included general subject ideas we can go over. However, if there's a specific subject matter you'd like to know about or know more about, then we can discuss it. But you also need to consider that Daphne and I would like to run this club each year, and that each year will see the influx of another batch of first years who would benefit from this club. That means we're starting from scratch each September to allow the new cohort of first years to participate. However, if we haven't imparted upon you what we want to by June next year, then we may well continue for you on the Sundays opposite those where we'll be starting from scratch. Any questions so far? Asked Daphne. A Gryffindor first year, Faye Dunbar, asked, Harry, is it true you headbutted a killing curse? Giving a small snort and shaking his head, he replied, 2 things. First, no one really knows what happened when Voldemort cast the killing curse at me, because everyone but me is dead who would know. Anything you have read that states otherwise is only a guess at best, and a blatant lie at worst. Secondly, I'm sorry to say you have just committed a serious breach of etiquette. I'm not having a go at you for it because you didn't know and that's why you should be here. But do you know what it was? No, sorry, she meekly replied. Does anyone else? Asked Harry, looking around. No one knew or guessed. Not surprising, really, said Harry. The breach occurred when you used my first name when you were not given leave to do so. That is, I did not say you could call me by my first name before you used it. Properly you should have asked Potter or Mr. Potter, is it true you headbutted a killing curse? There are some in the wizarding world who take great offense when you use their first name when they haven't said you can do so. It's referred to as being overly familiar and is considered disrespectful. Because we don't want any of you to feel uncomfortable in here, and because we want each of us to consider the others friends, please call me Harry, all of you. "And I give you leave to call me Daphne," said Daphne. "But only in this room. I still expect to be called Miss Greengrass outside that door. All right?" After receiving a number of verbal nods, Daphne asked, "Please, are there any more questions specifically about what we hope to accomplish in here?" Another Gryffindor, Seamus Finnegan, asked, "Yeah, why do we need to ride the Hogwarts Express to come to Hogwarts? It takes me and me dad ages to travel all the way down to London just for me to have to ride all the way back to southwestern Scotland on a train." A question I'm guessing almost all Muggle-borns who don't live near London wonder about, said Daphne. The answer lies in its tradition. It's one of those traditions that has arisen for only the last couple hundred years. The Hogwarts Express ride is supposed to be a time when the differences between the houses comes down, and students are free to interact without interference from the professors. Instead, it is considered by many, including some raised in the wizarding world, as a complete waste of time, irrespective of the fact it's a tradition. But because it has become tradition, it won't be going away anytime soon. And there are those who would feel offended if you recommend it be done away with. "Next?" asked Harry. When none were forthcoming, Harry said, "We intend to hold these meetings each Sunday a fortnight apart. They will be held here at the same time, each time. The only time the meetings will not be held will be when we are all on break, whether it be Christmas break, Easter break, or summer break, or end-of-year exams are taking place. There is no mandatory requirement to attend. However, if you miss a session and it covers something you want to know about, we will not be discussing it during the next meeting for you. It'll be your responsibility to find out what you missed from your fellow club members. We also don't intend to assign mandatory homework. If you want extra material to research or study, it'll be off your own backs, but we can help you there. This abandoned classroom will also remain the meeting room for the club. You may even appreciate the decor indicates this. However, it is not a houseless common room. The door will be locked and warded from intrusion when meetings are not being held. Everyone clear on this, so far? Again with the verbal nods. "Anyone want to take a punt and ask a question before we wrap it up for the day?" he asked. "Yeah. Potter," one of the second-year Gryffindors asked, "what is it with all the crests around the room?" He was waving his hand in a sweeping gesture to the crests on the walls. Harry looked at Daphne and gave a slight nod. She understood the message. "While we plan on going through the nobility of the wizarding world in one of these sessions coming up, I find no harm in giving you an overview of it now. You of course know of the 4 houses of Hogwarts. These crests you see high up on the walls around us represent the houses of Wizarding Britain. The ones with a wide red band through them identify them as houses that are lost to us. That is, no one knows if there is a current heir for any of them. The others identify those which are still active." Indicating one on the wall above the blackboard, she said, "There's mine, Greengrass. A couple across, there's Harry's Potter." The reason why the houses are so important to Wizarding Britain will be discussed in a couple of weeks. And yes, it's important to know. The houses are broken down into noble and most ancient, noble and ancient, ancient, elder, minor, and magical. Within the noble houses, there are the lords and ladies and the heirs. Within all houses are the head of house and the heirs. The chart on the back wall identifies the head of each house and the heir, whether they be the heir apparent or the heir presumptive. Harry is currently head of House Potter, but because he is not yet of age, is not yet formally recognized as Lord of the House, Lord Potter. I'm heiress presumptive of House Greengrass, which means I currently stand to become Lady Greengrass on the passing of my father and I come of age. However, as Harry and I are also betrothed, I also stand to become Lady Potter when we marry soon after we both reach our majority. What those titles mean and why they're so important to Wizarding Britain will be discussed in depth in a couple of weeks. It's going to take a while. And I don't mean to be rude, but what about how you're betrothed at such a young age? Asked another. Fair question, replied Harry. What many of you may be unaware of is that betrothal contracts amongst the nobility of the Muggle world used to be quite common until a couple centuries ago. They have since fallen out of favor. In the magical world, however, betrothal contracts, while not as common as they once were, can still be found. My and Daphne's fathers wrote up a betrothal contract for the two of us when we were both infants. I don't understand what was going through my father's head at the time, but I know the betrothal was agreed to, in part, to bring our two houses into a closer formal and public relationship. An alliance. But what if you're not suited to each other? Asked the same person. What if you even hate each other? Most betrothal contracts have built-in escape clauses. One or the other party of the contract can back out, but it requires the payment of a substantial penalty to do so. However, the betrothal contract signed for Daphne and I has no such clause, and that's where magic comes in. From our experiences of this, it appears that magic itself is working with us to ensure we are compatible and will be happy with each other. As things are, both of us are happy with this arrangement. We find ourselves growing closer together the more time we spend with each other. So when Professor Snape tried to separate you last weekend, it could be seen as he was trying to keep you apart, stopping the magic from taking hold, said one of the lone Slytherins. Precisely, replied Harry firmly. As such, he was interfering with the betrothal contract, and that meant he was interfering with the business of both our houses. So, as you can see, it was a very big and serious thing that happened. Wow, he heard one of the young girls say. All right, folks, said Harry. I know this wasn't a very long session. However, it was to give you an understanding of what we're going to be covering here over the school year, to see if you'd be interested in becoming a member, and give you the opportunity to now report back to those of your friends who asked you to check it out for you. The next meeting will be 2 weeks from today, and we're really going to be getting stuck into things from then on. We look forward to seeing you then. After closing the meeting down, Harry led the 7 down to the Great Hall. It was not yet time for dinner, but Harry wanted to see if there was any gossip about the etiquette club among the students. Sitting at the Ravenclaw table, they received a few other students approaching to ask if they could join the club. Each was told to present themselves at the next meeting a fortnight later. After the meal, he led Daphne outside and sat on one of the stones of a large standing circle of them, on the path to Hagrid's hut. She joined him sitting on the stone and leaned against him. Daddy is coming for us at lunchtime tomorrow, she softly said. Harry grunted in agreement and said, I still think our leaving the school for half a day tomorrow was a poor excuse for Dumbledore to not grant us permission to visit with Sirius at Greengrass Estate over the weekend. With a shrug, she said, he had the right to do it, as we didn't give him a suitable reason to allow us to leave. Plus, him coming back with how you missed pretty much all of the first week, then we were gone for a significant part of last Sunday for the trials, and how other students didn't have those level of privileges was a fair point or two. No, he's just shitty at me for that meeting in his office the other day, said Harry. I half expected him to reverse his decision to allow us to run the etiquette club as well. Just out of spite, you know. You think he could be that vindictive? She asked. Yeah, I do, he replied. Well, it's running now, she said. I'd be demanding answers and his reasoning if he blocked it now. Besides, we'll also be leaving the castle for the afternoon tomorrow for the trial, and that's something he can't refuse us. Yeah, and it gets me out of History of Magic, chuckled Harry. Double win. After charms the next morning, Harry met Daphne in the entrance hall. She was already waiting for him with Cygnus. Ready to go? Asked Cygnus. Yep, replied Harry. Side by side, they walked out the front doors of the castle and up the drive towards Hogsmeade. After a couple minutes of silence in their walk, Harry looked at Cygnus and asked, Any hints on what we can expect? Dumbledore has a canny political mind, replied Cygnus. He has perfected the art of answering questions with only as much information as he's willing to give. Amelia is aware of this and has been working on the exact wording of the questions she wants to ask him once she has him on the stand. But I'm not sure we're going to hear everything we need to hear. Dumbledore's been keeping everything close to his own chest for years. A little court case like this isn't going to pry those secrets out of him any time soon. Harry thought for a few moments before he said, Then the counter to his taciturnity is to carefully listen to his answers to any question asked, and to consider basing your next question on his previous response as a form of confirmation. Also, don't assume that what he states is in direct response to the question asked, or even if it is the entire answer. Cygnus cast a long look at Harry before he said, "Points well made, Harry. We'll keep them in mind." In an almost abrupt change of subject, Harry asked, "How's Sirius getting on?" "He's aware we were forbidden to leave Hogwarts over the weekend. He's doing quite well and—" "Yes," replied Cygnus. "He wasn't happy to learn you were refused leave to visit, but he knows it wasn't your fault. He wanted to come along to pick you up today, but I convinced him not to. I did not want to risk a confrontation between him and members of Hogwarts staff over such a petty issue. However, he'll be waiting for us at the Ministry. I suspect I'd have had to have the elves chain him to the floor of his room if I refused him to at least meet us there." "It would have been unfair not to allow him to attend," said Harry. "He's been unlawfully incarcerated for 10 years. To deny him his freedom, even for his own good, would have been cruel. Besides, I'm looking forward to seeing him again. He may not be my immediate family, but he's the closest thing I've got to my parents at the moment." After thinking about how that might have sounded, he said, "Sorry, that may have come off as being insulting or at least insensitive. I did not mean it to be." "I understand, Harry," said Cygnus gently. "I take it you have memories of him too." "Oh, yes," replied Harry with a wide smile. "He used to get Dad in trouble with Mum all the time. In Dad's letter, where it states he had to sleep on the couch for a couple of weeks because of the betrothal contract, was only one of many times my dear godfather got either or both of them in trouble with Mum." With a shrug, he said, "I remember she loved it, though. She'd yell at both of them like they were naughty schoolboys for a while before she'd pick me up if I was in the room and walked away from them. I don't think she had any idea I would remember exactly what she said to me. All these years later, even if I didn't understand a word of it then, she would just talk to me because I happened to be there." "What sort of things would she say to you, Harry?" asked Daphne. "I don't mean to be so personal, it's just—" "I don't mind," replied Harry. "She would tell me of how she was happy that they could still have fun together with the war on, that the shenanigans they got up to both showed they still retained their fun-loving natures and acted as stress relievers. She was worried that the brutality of the war would cause them to change, to become people other than what they were while still at school, that they would change so much they would lose their friendship, their love for one another." Harry noticed that the initial pace Cygnus had set walking towards the gates of Hogwarts had considerably slowed. They were now barely trudging along. Cygnus said, "A very smart woman was your mother, and not just book-smart, either. She could see how things were headed, what the likely consequences of an action would lead to, and acted accordingly." They had just reached the gates, so Cygnus led Harry and Daphne through before leading them to the 3 broomsticks. From there it was a quick trip to the Ministry. Harry found Cygnus had led him and Daphne back to courtroom 5 again. They were sitting in almost the same seats. This time there were quite a few others sitting in the visitors' gallery with them, plus the same 2 journalists from the week before. One of those particular muckrakers came over and sat behind Harry and Daphne before he leaned forward and quietly said, "Lord Potter, I wonder if I might be able to ask you a few questions before the trial starts." Harry gave Daphne a glance, who returned an almost minuscule shrug in return. He turned to look at the journalist and said, "Normally, I would not care to comment. However, I read your articles last week in the Daily Prophet and found them to be factual and non-compromising. For that reason, I'll do my best to answer what of your questions I care to with honesty. However, show me you are not to be trusted in future, and you'll never receive a true quote from me again. Deal?" The journalist thought for a moment before replying, "I am not Rita Skeeter, my lord. I will always write the facts. Therefore it is no bother for me to agree." "Deal." Giving a short nod, Harry said, "In that case, sir, ask away." The man grabbed a notebook and quill from one of the deep pockets of his robes. Allowing the notebook and quill to hover, he said, "It's a dictaquill, my lord. And for your information, if you see something like this and the quill has a lime green ostrich feather, it's a quick quotes quill. They're nasty things and write whatever nonsense the owner of it wants it to write." "Thank you for the heads up," replied Harry. Setting the dictaquill going, the journalist said, "Thank you for speaking with me today, my lord." "You're welcome. Is it true you were unaware of the Wizarding World until your 11th birthday?" "I received my Hogwarts letter a few days before my 11th birthday. Until then, that was the only item of mail I'd ever received from the Wizarding World." My Hogwarts letter confirmed my belief the wizarding world actually existed. It was the next day I found Diagon Alley. You've never received correspondence from the wizarding world until your Hogwarts letter? Correct. My lord, I would have believed there would have been a great many people in the wizarding world who would have sent you owls before then. That may be true. I have no way of knowing otherwise. However, I've never received them, and I have no explanation as to why. Very well, I have it on good authority Lord Sirius Black, recently exonerated of charges relating to the events at Potter's Cottage on the 31st of October 1981, and in the township of Coventry a few days later, is in fact your sworn godfather. Is this true? Your good authority is both correct and has a big mouth. Yes, Lord Black is my sworn godfather. Ah. It appears the trial is about to start. May I speak with you on this at another time? You may. As Harry and the journalist were winding up their short talk, Harry noticed the members of the Wizengamot, who were sitting in judgment, had begun to enter the room. They went directly to their seats. Again, Madame Marchbanks took the centre president's seat, while Amelia took the seat on the end. Just as she was about to bang her gavel, Sirius walked quickly into the room and bounded up the stairs to sit next to Harry. "What I miss?" he asked quietly. "Nothing yet," replied Harry. "They only entered a few moments before you did." "Cutting it a bit close there, weren't you, godfather?" Sirius turned to look at him and gave a big grin. Harry was happy to see his teeth, which, based on the last time he'd been able to see him, were in a horrendous state, were now fully repaired and sparkling white. Harry also noticed that, while his godfather still appeared to be quite gaunt, was moving much more fluidly and healthily. He was clearly bouncing back to full health. His hair was trimmed, and his full, straggly beard was trimmed back to a small goatee. "You're looking much better, godfather," said Harry, eyeing the man critically. "Living with the green grasses is doing you a lot of good." As Harry finished talking, Madame Marchbanks banged her gavel 3 times and called the court to order. "Bring in the accused," she called. A moment later, Dumbledore was escorted into the room between 2 auras. He was not, however, shackled in any way, as he was attending willingly. He approached the chair, but just before sitting down, took out his wand and reconfigured it into a plush throne-like chair. Then he calmly sat down, giving the appearance he was there looking out upon his subjects, rather than being sat in judgment. Madame Marchbanks then turned to Amelia and said, "Madam Bones, the charges, if you will." What followed was a long afternoon of Dumbledore answering questions with misdirections, half-truths, and just about every other form of avoidance Harry could remember reading about. It was quite clear how the man had managed to become the headmaster of Hogwarts, the chief warlock and supreme mugwump, all at the same time. Harry also noticed that Amelia had made good use of the timeline he drew up as Dumbledore tried to claim that Harry's proper guardians, with the exception of the Greengrasses, were either imprisoned or were lying in St. Mungo's. When asked why he didn't take Harry to the Greengrasses, he said he believed the risk was too high. The Greengrasses were servants of Voldemort. That was when the memory of what Dumbledore and McGonagall said to each other while Harry was in Dumbledore's arms as he was being placed on the doorstep of Privet Drive was played. Dumbledore had to dance a number of back-pedaling steps and claimed his memory was not so clear of the event. When asked about why Harry had not received any mail from the wizarding world until his Hogwarts letter, he claimed, for Harry's safety, to have put up mail owl notice me not wards. His excuse was because the mail could have included portkeys or the like to spirit Harry away from the safety of his aunt and uncle. That gave Harry an idea for when he next spoke with the journalist. There were many times during the questioning phase of the trial that Dumbledore was caught out not answering a question fully or being otherwise disingenuous. It did him harm. The questioning had gone on for so long that a break was called partway through for people to get something to drink or visit the toilet. Even Dumbledore's voice was becoming a bit hoarse. In the end, Dumbledore was found guilty of most of the charges. He managed to skive off being found guilty of the most serious, though, including the conspiracy and neglect charges. However, he was found guilty of abuse of authority of his position as chief warlock in the remainder. When sentence was passed, Dumbledore was banned from returning to sit upon the Wizengamot in any capacity and fined over 10,000 galleons. He was not, however, given any prison time. As an added bonus, he was stripped of his position representing magical Britain on the ICW, which also meant he could no longer be Supreme Mugwump. Furthermore, the temporary suspension of Dumbledore's claim over Harry as his magical guardian was made permanent. It was agreed Harry would be protected under the joint custody of Madame Longbottom, Madame Bones, Lord Black and Lord Greengrass. He would also not be permitted to claim loco parentis or magical guardianship upon any other minor, including students at the school. "Damn," muttered Harry. "That means we still have to put up with him at Hogwarts." Harry, Amelia, and Cygnus all tried to see if one of the charges against Dumbledore could be levelled against the man in his role as headmaster. However, everything illegal the man had done, he had done in his role as chief warlock. Harry raised how Dumbledore used the Hogwarts infirmary and school nurse to care for Harry for the near 24 hours between the time he was removed from Godric's Hollow until he was dumped at the Dursleys. However, he could claim to have done it as chief warlock, which is precisely what he did during the trial. Dumbledore was no fool. He knew if he said he'd done it as headmaster, then his position as headmaster would also have been put at risk. After the sentence was passed, Dumbledore turned to Harry and Daphne and said, "Harry, Miss Greengrass, I'll escort you back to school." "Insulting me again, headmaster, by using my first name," mocked Harry. "And sorry, but we have further business to attend till we return to Hogwarts." With one of his unpatented grandfatherly put-upon sighs, Dumbledore said, "Very well, I expect to see you back before not too much longer," and walked from the room. As Dumbledore was leaving, the journalist who spoke to Harry earlier quickly returned and set up his dictaquill. While the man was setting things up quickly with a practiced hand, Harry asked him, "As I'm doing you a favor by participating in this interview, I wonder if I can ask one of you." "And what would that be, my lord?" the journalist replied. "I need you to include as part of your article that I had nothing to do with, nor had any idea of, the Notice Me Not wards for male owls on where I was living. And that, even if I didn't receive any mail from the Wizarding World, I'd still like to apologize to those within the Wizarding World who sent me mail for not thanking them for their effort." With an appraising look, the journalist said, "I can do that. If you promise me, where possible, you'll give me exclusives." Harry snorted in response and said, "Keep writing the truth and you've probably got yourself a deal." Harry then answered a few more questions from the journalist, even though Sirius was giving him funny looks. However, once the journalist recognized the man sitting next to Harry was the so-called infamous Lord Sirius Black, Sirius was also asked questions which for the most part he was happy to answer. The interview was interrupted with the return of Cygnus. "Ready to go?" Harry and Daphne both nodded. Harry turned to the journalist and said, "Sorry about this, but I invite you to owl me at Hogwarts if there's something you want to ask me. As with this interview, if I'm willing to answer your questions, I'll provide you with the answers. If not, I'll tell you so." "Thank you, my lord," replied the journalist as he was packing away his dictaquill. As the four of them made their way back outside, Cygnus asked, "Is it wise to talk to journalists?" "Yes," replied Harry. "By my being willing to talk to them, I maintain some level of control over what they write about me. If I refuse to talk to them, then they're free to write whatever they want." It was the famous author Mark Twain who once said, "Never pick a fight with people who buy ink by the barrel." I think he was right. It's far better to work with them. "Control them from the inside, you mean, by way of exclusive interviews?" asked Cygnus with a grin. "Yeah, pretty much," replied Harry with a shrug. Cygnus turned to Sirius and said, "I told you he was a Slytherin hiding in Ravenclaw." The pained look on Sirius's face made Harry laugh. "All right," said Sirius. "Clearly this is Give My Godfather Indigestion Day. However, we still need to meet Amelia. She has news for Harry." Harry, wondering what was going on, followed the two lords down the passageway and into the offices of the DMLE. Inside, both lords approached the young lady sitting at what was clearly a secretary's desk. "Good afternoon, Nanine," said Sirius in a pleasant, silky smooth drawl. "Is Madame Bones back from trial yet?" "Oh, yes, Lord Black," the girl near tittered. "Let me just check to ensure she's ready for you." And she rose and approached a door just off to the side behind her desk. She gave it 2 quick raps of her knuckles, listened closely, and then opened the door to duck inside. Harry looked at Sirius as soon as the girl disappeared behind the door. Really, godfather? Already? Sirius just gave a little smirk and a slight shrug before he said, I can't have my godson doing better than me with the ladies. It just wouldn't be proper. A few moments later, she was back and holding the door open. Director Bones will see you now, she said with a coy look towards Sirius. Again, the two lords led the four through. They walked into Amelia's inner office. After finishing their short meeting with Amelia, she allowed them to use her personal office fireplace to flow directly to Greengrass Estate. Harry was one of the first after Daphne to collapse into one of the available sofas. So there is a bloody prophecy with my name on it, he grouched. But who the hell is TMR? All right, said Sirius. A PWBD is clearly Dumbledore. He's the one who heard the prophecy. CPT is supposed to be Sybil Patricia Trelawney. She's the professor of divination at Hogwarts. HAP is Harry James Potter. So TMR has to be the other person. I'll see what I can track down and even give my Aunt Cassiopeia a call. She's in her late 70s, but still has her little black book. It may provide us with some information. Is there any way we can acquire a list of past students of Hogwarts? Asked Harry. I mean, it shouldn't be too hard to then go through the names to see if there's someone or multiple someones who have those initials. Good idea, said Cygnus. I'll speak to old Professor Tofty at the Ministry. He has the records of all past and current Hogwarts students in his files. It'll be a nightmare to go through all those files, though. Well, I'd guess that the records would be in alphabetical order, said Harry. Start with only going through those whose surnames begin or began with the letter R first. With a slight wince, Cygnus said, Of course, in a tone that said he knew he should have considered that. The initials seemed familiar to Harry. He was going through the names of all the students he knew, all the wizards and witches he had met, and who had told him their names, every Daily Prophet he had read. However, it didn't come to him. If anyone can figure out who those initials belonged to without months slogging through records, they should get a medal, thought Harry. Something to reward. Harry suddenly shot forward in his seat until he was sitting on the edge of it. The others saw a look of shock on his face. Harry, asked Sirius, what is it? TMR, replied Harry softly. Tom Marvolo Riddle. Slytherin House. Head boy in 1945. Earned a special award from Hogwarts for services to the school in 1943. Headmaster Dippet awarded it to him. He earned it for identifying Hagrid as the one who opened the Chamber of Secrets back then. A young fourth-year Ravenclaw student by the name of Myrtle Malone was killed in the second-floor girls' toilets. "Wee," said Sirius, obviously confused. "How do you know that?" "I went for a wander through the castle a few days ago," explained Harry. "It was a free period, and I both wanted to start to make a move on mapping the castle and burn off some energy. I walked into what I found to be the Hogwarts trophy room on the 3rd floor. In the trophy room I found a cutting from the Daily Prophet that had an article on the story. It was in a picture frame directly above a small glass case that had the award. On another wall was a large wooden board that contained the list of names of the head boy and head girl for each year dating back to the beginning of the century. Riddle's name was there as head boy for 9. "How in Merlin's name did you remember that?" asked Sirius. "Oh," said Harry, snapping back to the present. "I have an eidetic memory. I remember everything. I also have a full mindscape and am very skilled at occlumency. The latter helps me keep the eidetic memory organized." "You," stuttered Sirius, "you have a full mindscape at 11? "Actually, I've had a full mindscape since I was about 8, replied Harry. "The eidetic memory allowed me to develop the mindscape, and the mindscape allows me to control the eidetic memory, which then allowed me to improve the mindscape, which in turn allows me to improve the storage of memories. It's kind of a self-perpetuating neuromutualism. That is, each benefits the other and supports the other. The mind healer at St. Mungo's said he's never seen the like on someone so young. He was the one who identified what's going on in my head as a fully formed and functional mindscape, and then helped me on my way to both rebuild it and make significant improvements on it in the case of occluding my mind from legilimences. "Sirius," called Cygnus. When Sirius looked at him, he said, "It was Harry's memories that were played at your trial, Harry's memories from when he was 15 months old." Turning back to look at Harry with a look of awe on his face, Sirius asked, "You remember everything?" "Yep," grinned Harry. "Do you want me to give Cygnus the memory for his pensieve? I have of you with my infant pacifier stuck in your mouth, and you unable to remove it." Sirius looked at Harry with a look not unlike horror. "Well, I, of course, didn't understand what was happening at the time," shrugged Harry. "I now know it was a burst of accidental magic." Sirius snorted and said, "Harry was fussing. Lily was in the kitchen preparing his dinner while I was trying to keep him occupied. I kept putting his dummy in his mouth, and little Lord Fauntleroy here kept taking it out and trying to give it to me. I didn't mind as it kept him occupied. However, Harry seemed to be getting annoyed that I wasn't sticking it in my mouth. Next thing I know, he's holding the dummy out to me like he's trying to shove it at me, but I kept just out of his reach. He makes this grunt sound with a frown on his face, and the bloody dummy leaps out of his fingers and plants itself in my gob." Chuckling, Harry said. The look on Sirius's face when it happened, though, priceless. "I then reached to pull it back out of my mouth and found I couldn't budge it," said Sirius, now with a slight grin on his own face with unfocused eyes, remembering the surround of the dummy was fused to my lips. "I kept trying to pull it out, though. I even took out my wand and tried a finite charm, but it didn't work. I tried to call for Lily, but the only sounds I could make were quite muffled." Harry was giggling away almost hysterically, and that brought Lily into the room. She took a few seconds to work out what had happened, and then she started laughing. I, on the other hand, was getting both annoyed and frantic trying to remove the offending object. "Huffing," Harry said. So here was Sirius gesticulating wildly, a well-dressed pure-blood trying to stand tall and proud like a true pure-blood heir, with a baby's light blue pacifier stuck firmly in his gob with a ribbon hanging from it. It was bloody hilarious. Even Mum thought so. She tried a couple of times to cancel the magic that caused the dummy to be stuck there, but couldn't undo whatever it was that I'd done. Trouble is, she was also laughing too hard to properly concentrate. After about 3 or 4 minutes, she had just about lost it completely, and was laughing so hard she had tears running down her cheeks, and had developed a dose of hiccups. Sirius got really annoyed and stormed out of the room. Daphne was trying very hard not to laugh, but was snorting in amusement while blushing. Cygnus, however, was roaring with laughter. "I apparated to St. Mungo's," said Sirius with a fond smile. "It was the most embarrassing day of my life. I did hook up with a pretty nurse as a result, though." "It's also one of my most treasured memories," said Harry. After Sirius left, Dad came home and had to give Mum a calming draught to get any worthwhile information out of her. As soon as he could get her to tell him what happened, he said he had to go and find Sirius to make sure he was all right. He also said he wanted to take photographic evidence of the foul crime. Mum accused him of just wanting blackmail material. It wasn't long after that, I think, they bound my magic down, but I must have been asleep when they did it, because I don't remember it happening. "It was only a few days later," sighed Sirius. "The fact it took a team of specialists to unravel the sticking charm you used to stick the pacifier in my mouth was worrying to your parents. Though they didn't like it, they knew your magical power had to be bound down a fair bit in case you caused some accidental magic that harmed someone and no one could undo it. That was also about a week before Potter's cottage was attacked. Only James, Lily, and myself knew about your magic being bound." "Well, that's one probable explanation for why my magic was never unbound," replied Harry with a sigh. "Yes, but it still should have been detected when you went in for your inoculations at St. Mungo," said Cygnus. Said Harry a bit sheepishly. "You were never taken in for your inoculations, were you?" asked Cygnus. "No," replied Harry. "However, I received them while I was in there after what happened at the sorting feast." "Well, at least they're done," said Cygnus. "Yet another thing that old fool should have seen to as your magical guardian, and didn't. Anyway," said Harry, flipping his hand in a throwaway gesture, "this has gotten us completely off topic. The prophecy. What do I need to do to find out what the prophecy states?" "You'll need to visit the prophecy hall in the Department of Mysteries," replied Cygnus. "There's only a few people who can touch the orb that contains a memory recording of the prophecy. And who are they? Asked Harry. The one who gave the prophecy, the one who heard it, and from whom the memory was likely taken, and those the prophecy is about. That means Sybil Trelawney, Albus Dumbledore, you and whoever TMR is, replied Sirius. Once the prophecy orb is on the shelf, not even the unspeakables can access it, reportedly, but that's not to say they're not already aware of what the prophecy is or states before the memory was placed in the orb, mused Harry. Therefore they'd not need to access the orb. Sitting forward again, he said, Still, I guess we should make arrangements for me to hear the damnable thing. The next morning, the seven were sitting together at breakfast when Hedwig flew in bearing Harry's copy of that morning's Daily Prophet, unshrinking and unfolding it. He saw the lead story was, of course, the sacking of Dumbledore as Chief Warlock, Britain's representative on the ICW and as Supreme Mugwump. The story included the highlights of the trial and left little out that was of any substance. But it was plain Dumbledore's support was waning fast. The story immediately below was the interview Harry gave the reporter, a man he now knew was named Montague Monty Wordsworth. Harry wondered if he was in any way related to the famous English poet William Wordsworth. It didn't much matter to him. The man was true to his word and wrote well. Harry decided he would keep his promise and do his best to work with the endeavouring Mr. Wordsworth in future. He felt it didn't hurt to have a journalist he could somewhat count upon to write the truth. They had an uneventful day, and after classes, Harry knew he needed to get his homework out of the way. As he missed History of Magic the previous day, Neville told him what the homework for it was, while Susan told Daphne what she'd missed in their combined class. The seven were in the library working quietly on their homework, offering suggestions to the odd request for assistance amongst them. That night, Harry walked from the Ravenclaw Tower up to the Astronomy Tower for their class. There, he met Daphne and Tracy. They were grateful that it was a clear night, but it was also apparent the long cold of winter was slowly creeping in. Because they were so tired, the cold also seemed to seep into their very bones. It was a very tired cohort of first-year Ravenclaws and Slytherins that crawled into bed during the early hours of the morning. As with the previous week, Harry didn't want to leave his lady alone at breakfast. After a hot shower with a period where he made the water bitterly cold to wake himself up, he trudged down to breakfast. He was a bit later than normal, but made it nonetheless. The others of the seven were sitting at the Hufflepuff table. Making his way over, he plopped down onto a seat next to Daphne and almost immediately laid his head on her shoulder. "A bit forward there, aren't we, Potter?" she asked. "Quiet, pillow of mine. I'm trying to sleep," he mumbled in reply. With a snort of amusement, Daphne hunched her shoulder hard, causing Harry to snap back up straight. "I'm awake," he blurted, blinking owlishly. The others, except Tracy, chuckled. Tracy yawned. As both Ravenclaw and Slytherin were free until the afternoon class of Defense Against the Dark Arts, Harry begged off on doing anything else but going back to bed to sleep. Another few hours. He thought he might receive an earful from Daphne about it, but she'd also made that decision. When the mail arrived, Harry turned to look at the head table. He noticed almost all the professors received mail, except for the headmaster. He was sure the old man would receive quite a bit of mail about the article in the Daily Prophet, but he received none. Thinking about it, Harry figured out the old man must have put an owl mail redirection system in place. His mail was probably all sitting on his desk. They all met up again at lunch. The three Ravenclaws and Slytherins much more rested. "Enjoy your nap," asked Susan sweetly. "Much? Thank you," replied Harry, ignoring the mock sarcasm. "I now understand why my dorm mates all choose to stay in bed and sleep instead of coming down to breakfast. I thought last week was bad, but this week was worse." "Does anyone know if Dumbledore has found a replacement data professor yet?" asked Tracy. "Or is he still teaching the class?" "He's still teaching the class," replied Neville. "He's also very, very good." Harry humphed and said he'd have to be. After all, he took down Grindelwald. Harry found Dada class under the instruction of Dumbledore was actually pretty good. He had the same class with the man the week before, but now that he had a better understanding of the quality of teaching at the school, he had to acknowledge Dumbledore was a master teacher. Dumbledore released the class early, so, with a kiss on the cheek for his betrothed and letting her know he'd meet up with her in the library, Harry hurried back to the Ravenclaw common room. As he was walking through to the door to his dorm, he noticed a comic book sitting on one of the small tables. After picking up his astronomy text plus star charts, he walked back into the common room. Picking up the comic book and flipping through it, he noticed an advertisement on the inside back cover for a set of costumes. Looking at the cutout advertisement, he looked around the room and found a 7th year studying in one of the study carousels that bordered the huge room. He took the comic over to the older boy and waited until his presence was acknowledged. "Yes?" asked the older boy. Harry flipped open the comic to the last page and, indicating it to the older boy, asked, "Would you mind doing me a big favor and creating a permanent copy of this advertisement, please?" The boy looked at the ad and asked suspiciously, "What are you up to?" "A harmless prank," replied Harry in as straightforward a manner as he could. "On a Ravenclaw?" asked the boy. "Definitely not," huffed Harry. The boy stared at him for a few moments more before Harry could see he'd do it. With a small shrug of his shoulders, the boy said, "Why not?" He grabbed the comic book off Harry and a small piece of parchment and laid the two side by side. The boy had his wand in his hand and waved it over the two while muttering a short incantation. He did not notice Harry memorizing both the incantation and the wand movements. The small piece of parchment turned into a perfect replica of the entire inside of the back cover. With a grin, Harry said, "Thank you a lot." He picked up both, returned the comic book to the small coffee table, and sat down at one of the vacant carousels. Pulling out a muggle pen he'd found discarded somewhere, he filled in the appropriate places on the order form, checking the boxes for the costume he wanted. He also checked the box that asked if he wanted a copy of their catalogue of other costumes. While Harry had been living at the Leaky Cauldron, he learned that the post office at Diagon Alley provided a special service. They acted as a remailing centre for mail heading out of the wizarding world into the Muggle world the Muggle way, and vice versa. After creating an envelope, he folded the order form and dropped it into the envelope along with enough galleons. He then addressed the envelope to be remailed the Muggle way via the Owl post office in Diagon Alley, along with the required fee to use the service. Just as he was finishing and was getting ready to head for the owlery, Hedwig flew in. "Hello, girl," said Harry. Hedwig hooted happily at him and raised her leg. Harry, after shrinking the small envelope due to its weight, tied it to the owl's leg. Hedwig gave the back of his hand a bit of a loving scratch with her beak before taking to the air and flying back out again. "Well," thought Harry, "that's a prank on its way to being set up." After Hedwig flew off, Harry quickly grabbed his book bag and hurried down to the library. The next afternoon, Harry was wandering down one of the more remote passages deep within the castle when he was suddenly grabbed and dragged into an alcove. As he was released, he drew his wand and spun about. Standing before him were a pair of identical twins, wearing Gryffindor robes, Weasleys. "Hello, Ickle Harrikins," said one. "What brings you wandering all on your lonesome all the way down here?" the other asked. "I'm just trying to figure out my way around this mausoleum," replied Harry warily. "I'm just getting a feel for all the corridors and hallways into a bit of a map inside my head." "Well," said one, "unless you're also aware that the castle has this tendency to rearrange itself as needed, then your mental map is not going to do you much good," continued the other. "Sorry?" asked Harry. "You mean classrooms and hallways and the like can move?" "Indeed, they can," exclaimed one. "You've noticed how the stairs in the grand staircase move, right?" Harry nodded. "Well, that can also happen with other parts of the castle." The look on Harry's face made both twins grin. "Look, you know it's a magic castle, right?" Harry nodded. "Then why is it so hard to understand and accept magic can do this?" Harry realized his expression must have been one of disbelief because the two twins grabbed him and took him back out into the hallway. "All right, Ickle Harrikins, follow us and we'll show you a hidden passage that may help you understand." "All right," nodded Harry. The twins then led Harry down a passageway until they came to a section of blank wall. One of the twins reached out and gave a wall sconce, a twist 90 degrees to the right, and a section of wall slid open. With a grin, one of the twins grabbed Harry by his robes over his shoulder and dragged him inside. "All right," said one of the twins, "Lumos," and his wand tip lit up. Harry knew the light charm, having been one of the first he'd learned in charms class, and lit his own wand tip. "All right, this is where we now walk for a little ways," said one of the twins. "Watch your step and your head," said the other. Harry then walked with them for what felt like only a few yards before he came upon a set of stairs. He climbed up only about a single floor when he reached near level ground again. A few turns and the twins stopped just ahead. "And this is what we mean by a magic castle, Harrykins," said one of the twins. The other simply pushed on a section of wall and it pivoted open. Walking out, Harry found himself standing behind a large statue, where it nearly filled an alcove off one of the main castle corridors. One of the twins stuck his head out from behind the statue and looked back and forth. He then pulled his head back, looked at his twin, and Harry grinned and stepped out. The other twin and Harry followed. Harry found himself standing in a well-lit hallway. The twins then led Harry down the hall and through a door at the end. When Harry walked through, he was shocked to find they were standing near the very top of the very tall grand staircase. "Whoa," said Harry in a little shock. "That should not be possible." "That's magic, Harrykins," said one of the twins. "We've just left one of the dungeon-level passages and are now on the 7th floor," said the other. "And it only felt as if we ascended a little over a single story between there and here," said the first. "That's magic," they said together. "How many of those secret passages are there?" asked Harry. "We know of 6, said one. "But one of them's blocked from a tunnel collapse," said the other. "And 3 of those lead outside the grounds," said the first. "But we know of others that aren't so secret," said the second. "They're just shortcuts," said the first. "Walk down a short flight of stairs and you come out 2 floors up, that sort of thing," said the other. "Dead useful for getting from the Great Hall to the Gryffindor common room," said the first. "To the Ravenclaw common room, too, I dare say," said the other. After they stopped speaking, they looked Harry expectantly. In as straight a face as he could, Harry softly intoned, "Love, 15. The twins gaped at Harry, then at each other, then back at Harry. Together they said, "Ha!" Harry sighed and just shook his head. "Sorry," he said, muggle joke. "If you say so," said one. "Ickle Harrykins," said the other. With a quick shake of his head, Harry said, "Change of subject. I've heard from my sources that you two are the so-called reigning pranksters of the school. Is this true?" "Indeed, we are," said one. "Fred and George Weasley at your service," said the other before both dropped into a simultaneous courtly bow. "Well, I have a prank I'm currently planning and getting the props for, and I wanted to make sure we don't clash." "Oh?" asked one. "Any way we can assist?" asked the other. "I don't know," replied Harry. "Honestly, what I've done is ordered a costume from a fancy dress shop. It's a character from a set of movies that came out about a decade ago. It's of a character that out-Snapes Snape." "Oh, really?" asked the first. "And how can we help?" asked the second. "I want to know if either of you know what charms Snape uses to make his cloak billow like that," said Harry. "There's supposed to be a book out that has a whole list of easy charms to make things happen to your clothes and appearance," said the second. "We were going to save up to buy it," said the first. "It's not stock, but Flourish and Blots are supposed to be able to get it for you," said the second. "Do you perchance know the name of this book?" asked Harry. "Simple cantrips for appearances' sake," said the two in unison. "All right," said Harry. "I'll order 2 copies. One for me and one for you two." The twins looked at each other and grinned. "You do that," said the first. "For us?" asked the second. "Think of it as 2 things coming together as one," replied Harry. "First, it's a bribe so you won't target me or my group of friends with your pranks. Second, I may want to join you 2 rapscallions or ask you to join me in future pranks. Harry Potter wants to join us in the noble art of pranking," they said before saying in unison, "Deal." "All right then," said Harry with a bit of a nod to them both. "I've got some ordering of books to do." He started to walk away before turning back. He said, "If there are any other books you're interested in acquiring that may assist in the noble art of pranking, let me know," then left. Harry headed for the Ravenclaw Tower while the twins started talking rapidly together. Clearly, they would soon be approaching him with a list of books they thought might prove useful. Harry received both copies of the book Simple Cantrips for Appearance's Sake on Friday morning's mail drop. The others of the 7 wanted to know what it was and why he ordered 2. One's for the Weasley twins, he replied. They're the ones who recommended it to me. Plus, it's partly a bribe paid to them to save us from being directly pranked by them when they finally get going again. Hermione already had one of the books open before her on the table, scanning through it. I don't get it, she said. They're just little things you can do as glamours and the like. Harry nodded and said, yes. And according to the twins, there's a cantrip in there that mimics the billowing cape trick Snape has going on. These are supposed to be useful for when you're getting your photograph taken, said Hermione. There's ones here for straightening curly hair, curling straight hair, giving you that glint of light off your teeth, brightening your eyes, making your eyes sparkle, pressing your clothes free of wrinkles, giving your hair that tousled look, heaps. Thinking about getting your photograph taken, Potter? Asked Daphne with that little smirk of which Harry was so fond. Looking through the other copy of the book, Harry replied, Nope, I just want to be able to do that billion cape thing Snape does. But the eye twinkle thing sounds suspiciously Dumbledore-ish. As for the hair things, Hermione, interested? Asked their bushy-haired friend. Oh, yes, but it's very short-term, though. It looks like all of them are. After all, how long does it take to take a photograph? There's a better option than short-term cantrips, Hermione, said Tracy. I have some shampoo and conditioner that settles down hair that's otherwise untamable. I stuttered, Hermione. Can you tell me where I can get some, please? It was clear to all then. Hermione really didn't like the way her hair was bushy. I'll loan you some, said Tracy, clearly feeling for her friend. But it's better to have some shampoo and conditioner made just for you. It works better that way. How? How do I get it made? Asked Hermione. Tracy felt for her friend and said, I'll get the appropriate order forms. I'll also need a decent snip of your hair, probably from underneath the top layers, to send in with the order. The potioneers need the hair to make sure they brew a batch that's keyed to you. Thank you, said Hermione with a bit of watery eye action. I searched high and low for a shampoo and conditioner near where I live that would tame this mess, but nothing worked. That's because the way your hair reacts has more to do with your magic than much else, said Hannah. That's why you need magical shampoo and conditioner. Harry perked up on hearing that and said, Really? Mine too. Don't you dare, Potter, Daphne half growled. I happen to like the tousled look your hair always has. Looking towards his betrothed, Harry said, But what about when I need to spiffy up? You know, formal occasions? Then we shall see about getting you your own special shampoo for those occasions, replied Daphne, using her fingers to run through his hair. Or we can perhaps use the cantrip you've found that straightens hair temporarily. Harry couldn't respond as his betrothed's fingers, where they were moving through his hair and scraping across his scalp, were giving him tingles all over. He had goosebumps. It felt good. After Daphne stopped what she was doing to him, Harry picked up one of the books and walked over to the Gryffindor table. He took seat in a spare spot immediately opposite the twins and handed them the book. As promised, said Harry, your book. Use it well and wisely. Both twins eagerly reached out for the book. Thank you, oh great and powerful one, said one. Truly, a gift of the ages, said the other. Yes, well, if there are any others you want, as I said, come and see me. I'm still awaiting a package to arrive by mail. When it comes, I'll get a message through to you to assist me with some charms work, said Harry, rising and returning to the other table. During Transfiguration, as he'd already read the text for the whole year, Harry used the time to speed-read his new book. By lunchtime, he was ready to try a couple out. As soon as the class was let out, they met with the others in the entrance hall. Harry grabbed them and pulled them all into the antechamber they congregated in before the sorting. I'm going to try a couple of the cantrips out of the book I received this morning, he said. With a frown, Hermione asked, Is it safe, do you think? Only one way to find out, declared Harry, and he flicked his wand out and tried the first one he'd thought of to test. A flick of his wand, a muttered incantation, and his eyes developed a twinkle. Susan and Hannah looked into his eyes with a bit of awe. Wow, said Susan. That looks wow. Another flick of his wand and muttered incantation, and Harry beamed a big smile at the 5 witches. One of his maulers gave a bright glint, even in the dim light of the alcove. "Honestly, Harry," huffed Hermione, "you look like a right ponce." While Daphne and Tracy laughed, Neville just grinned and shook his head. With a grin, Harry said, "Well, the charm's supposed to last a couple hours, so I'm going to test it out by smiling at a couple of our female yearmates and see what happens." "You're incorrigible," muttered Hermione. With a shrug, Harry asked, "Shall we?" before indicating for the others to precede him back out. As they were walking across the entrance hall, he cast the cantrip to make Hermione's hair fall flat and straight, before casting the second one to make her hair develop loose curls. From behind, he thought it looked fantastic. Hermione didn't notice the change. As Hermione walked into the Great Hall with Susan and Hannah side by side, and Harry and the others not too far behind, Harry heard a lot of the noises stop as people looked up. He could see from the expressions on people's faces that many did not recognize Hermione with her new hairdo. Looking around, it seemed that the 7 would be sitting at Gryffindor table for lunch, as the girls led them in that direction. What pleased Harry was that the Gryffindors were no longer giving Daphne and Tracy the evil eye for sitting at the table of the House of the Lions. Now they just allowed the 2 snakes room with barely an eye-bat. One of the other Gryffindor first years, as soon as she spotted Hermione, said, "Wow, Hermione, your hair looks great." Hermione frowned back, not understanding. "Pardon?" she asked. "Your hair, Hermione," said one of the others. "It looks fantastic." Confused, Hermione's hand came up to caress her bushy locks, only to find her hand, when she brought a mass of her curls around so she could see them, full of long silky locks of brown hair. She stood there for a few moments, looking at her hair in shock. "How?" she asked. No one in particular. Susan and Hannah helped an almost unresponsive Hermione onto the bench between them. "Harry did it," said Tracy. "He did it just before we walked into the Great Hall." Daphne pulled out a small compact mirror and, after casting an enlargement charm upon it, held it so Hermione could see herself in the reflection. "It's beautiful," Hermione said in awe. "I didn't want to say anything before." "Hermione," said Daphne, "but how would you like to have your teeth fixed permanently?" Hermione looked up and sadly said, "My parents are dentists. They're a form of muggle teeth healers. They want to have me fitted for braces, but since I can't go and get them constantly adjusted, as they would need to be, I'm going to have to wait until I finish my Hogwarts education before I can get it done." "Hermione, you live in the magical world," said Daphne. "There's no need for muggle healing here. If you want your teeth fixed, it takes only a few moments to get it done. Madame Pomfrey can do it for you in only a few minutes." "She can do that?" asked Hermione in surprise. "Yes," replied Daphne. "I dare say she's itching to do it for you. She just can't offer it to you without you asking. It breaches her healer's oath if she did." "Can we go after lunch?" pleaded the girl. "If you want," replied Daphne. Lunch was a calm affair, only interrupted by Lavender Brown and Parvati Patil offering their praises to Hermione for her hair. Hermione almost roughly grabbed Harry's new book back off him and was flipping through the pages looking for the cantrips he used. "Pages 46 and 48, Hermione," said Harry, a little bemused. Without even looking up, Hermione flipped to the first of the 2 pages and was reading avidly. She soon had her wand out and was slowly going through the wand motions as she read the pages. "Eat, Hermione," Harry had to order her. "Eat, or I'll tell Daphne not to take you to see Madame Pomfrey for your teeth." Hermione looked at him in horror for a few moments before quickly making herself a decent-sized sandwich, grabbing a banana and pouring herself a goblet of pumpkin juice. With one hand she proceeded to eat her lunch, while reading the book with the other. Harry and the others of the 7 looked at each other quite bemused by Hermione's focus. After lunch, Harry escorted Tracy to the greenhouses for herbology while Daphne headed to the infirmary with Hermione. She arrived only 10 minutes into the lesson, handing Professor Sprout a note excusing her for her tardiness. As the lesson had started, Harry was sitting with Tracy for the lesson while Daphne sat with Millicent Bulstrode across from them. "How'd it go?" asked Harry quietly. Daphne grinned back and said, You'll see for yourself after class." When he saw them, Harry told her they looked fantastic. The next morning, Harry met Daphne, her father and Neville in the entrance hall. Today they were heading in secret to the Department of Mysteries. There they'd be having a look at the prophecy that clearly involved Harry. "Sorry I'm late," said Harry. "I wanted to get a copy of the article from the Daily Prophet that's framed and hanging in the trophy room." Harry unrolled the configured parchment of the copy of the article, something he learned from the seventh-year Ravenclaw, who copied the last page of the Muggle comic book for him, and handed it to Cygnus. With one look at it, Cygnus hissed in surprise. "Yes, that's a young Voldemort, all right," he muttered. "Mind if I hold on to this, Harry?" he asked. "Of course not, Cygnus," replied Harry. "I brought it for you so it could be confirmed. TMR is Tom Marvolo Riddle." "And you've now confirmed Tom Marvolo Riddle is Voldemort." With a nod, Cygnus re-rolled the parchment and pocketed it within his robes. "Well, we'd best be going then." Together, the four headed off towards the front gates. "I didn't know you were coming with us, Neville," said Harry to the other boy. "Gran received a message from my great-uncle Algy," replied the boy with a shrug. "He said I need to be there when we get where we're going." "All right then," said Harry. "It'll be nice to have you along," and smiled. Stepping into the atrium at the Ministry of Magic from one of the many fireplaces, Harry noticed there wasn't nearly as many people as the previous Monday. Clearly Saturdays were not a mandatory workday at the Ministry. Cygnus led their small party through the security checkpoint before striding over to the bank of elevators. There they took a ride down to level 9. Striding straight across the small foyer, Cygnus opened the door that was only labelled Dom in Old English script on a wooden plaque. Inside, they were immediately met in a hallway by a person of modest height in a long grey cloak. Harry noticed he couldn't quite make out the person's face. Cygnus, after shaking the person's hand, turned to the three kids and said, "This is unspeakable talent. Unspeakable talent will take us through to the Hall of Prophecies, so Harry can hear the orb of prophecy that is in part, his name. Please obey all instructions of the unspeakable and ask no further questions." Harry, Daphne, and Neville all nodded their heads in understanding. With a voice Harry couldn't make out was either male or female, the unspeakable led them down the short hallway they were standing in and through a door at the end. As soon as the door closed, Harry had a sudden feeling of vertigo as the room appeared to spin. After a few long seconds, the doors stopped their motion, and the unspeakable led their little party through a door. To Harry, they all appeared identical. He wondered how the person in the grey cloak knew which door to open. Stepping through, the unspeakable led them through a room full of clocks and hourglasses before passing through a door out the other side of the room. The door opened up to a massive room in which Harry couldn't see either end or the opposite wall. The light from candles at each end of a rack were insufficient to show how far back the rows went. The room was filled with racks upon racks, all standing side by side with little room for two people to pass one another between them. Harry didn't know how many racks there were, but they entered next to row 53. The unspeakable led them along the rows as the numbers counted up. Soon they reached row 97. The unspeakable stopped for a moment and consulted a small device she held in their left hand. Then the unspeakable led them down that row. Only a short way down the row, the unspeakable stopped and turned to one of the racks. The wand, lit with a soft lumos, was used to light the rows. Soon, at about Harry's head height, the unspeakable stopped and, using their wand, indicated a softly glowing orb. "Mr. Potter, if HJP truly is you, then you will be able to lift this orb down," the unspeakable said. "If it is not you, it will stun you, at which point I will enervate you again. If you are able to lift the orb down, you will need to tap the top of it with your wand. Then the prophecy will play for you within the orb. If there is anyone in your party you do not want to hear the prophecy, they need to leave now." "No, they can stay," said Harry. Taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, Harry drew his wand and held it in his right hand. He then reached out and placed both hands under the orb. He carefully lifted the orb from its small wooden cradle and brought it down to his chest. Once there, he transferred the orb to be held only in the palm of his left hand. Holding the orb a little out in front of himself, Harry then raised his wand and lightly tapped the orb on top. The others gathered around and watched. The glow of the orb brightened and the grey smoky substance within cleared. Then Harry could see a younger Professor Trelawney sitting in a chair. Her voice was husky and quite deep as she said, "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the 7th month dies." After the prophecy played out, the image of Trelawney faded away back into the softly glowing, smoky interior. Still holding it and just staring at it, Harry said, "Well, that just sucks." "Bloody hell," said Neville, while Daphne took Harry in her arms and hugged him tightly. Cygnus was softly cursing under his breath. With what sounded like a sigh, the Unspeakable said, "Hold on to that, Mr. Potter, and follow me." The Unspeakable lifted down the small wooden stand the orb had sat upon on the shelf and led them back out to the end of the rows. The Unspeakable led them back out through the door by which they entered the hall and back to the room with the rotating doors. After he or she shut the doors spun around them again. When the doors stopped moving, the Unspeakable walked over to another door, opened it, and ushered them through. This time they came out into what seemed to be a set of offices. The Unspeakable then led them through a couple of offices before she halted at a plain, unmarked door. They knocked on the door and then opened it, ushering everyone through. Stepping into the room, Harry noticed it was an office, one that was magically expanded because the doors on either side of the one in which they entered could not have been there given the size of the room they were now in. Behind the desk sat another person in robes similar to the one the Unspeakable, who had led them through to the Hall of Prophecies, was wearing. The one who had led them walked up to the desk and placed the wooden stand on it in front of the other. Then he or she left the room, closing the door behind them. Once the door was closed, the new Unspeakable drew a wand and conjured 4 chairs for them to sit upon on their side of the desk. "Please sit, everyone," said the new Unspeakable. After taking their seats, the new Unspeakable reached up and flipped back the cowl of his or her robe. "Uncle Algy!" exclaimed Neville. "Hello, young Neville," said the man, for Harry could now see it was a rather nondescript man with a short, full beard. His hair was the colour of what Harry had come to know as salt and pepper, dark hair turning grey. "As Neville has now identified me, I guess I should properly identify myself," said Uncle Algy. "I'm known as Unspeakable Croaker, and Neville's Uncle Algernon." Turning to Harry, he held out his left hand and said, "Could you pass me the prophecy orb, please, Mr. Potter?" Harry offered the orb to the Unspeakable, who took it and placed it on the little wooden stand that was now before him. He then looked up and said, "So Albus Dumbledore heard a prophecy spoken by Sybil Trelawney. The prophecy, since Mr. Potter was able to pick it up and hear it, was about him and who Dumbledore identified as TMR. Clearly, if Mr. Potter is not the Dark Lord spoken of in the prophecy, then TMR is the Dark Lord. That just leaves identifying just who TMR is, and Dumbledore is not telling anyone who that is. Harry believes he knows," said Cygnus, "and after what he showed me, I believe he's correct." Cygnus reached into his robes and withdrew the roll of parchment Harry handed to him back at Hogwarts. Cygnus handed it to Croaker. Accepting the roll, Croaker unrolled it and studied it for a few moments. "So Tom Marvolo Riddle changed his name to Voldemort. No wonder we continually hit a brick wall in trying to figure out his origins." Frowning and thinking hard, Harry was pinching his bottom lip. Looking up at Croaker, he said, "Excuse me, sir, do you mind if I borrow a piece of parchment, a quill and a little ink? I just want to check something." A little surprised by the request, Croaker drew out the required paraphernalia from his desk and placed them on the desk in front of Harry. "What is it, Harry?" asked Cygnus. "I just want to confirm something," replied Harry. After he'd been writing a few things down and thinking for a bit, Harry sat up straighter and said, "It's an anagram." "Sorry?" asked Croaker. "Tom Marvolo Riddle, sorry. Voldemort is part of an anagram taken from the name Tom Marvolo Riddle." "Look," said Harry, indicating what he had written. The letters that form Voldemort are all in the name Tom Marvolo Riddle. Remove those letters and you're left with M-A-O-R, I-D, and L. From those you can get Lord, leaving you with M-A and I. And that's I am backwards, which means Tom Marvolo Riddle is anagrammatic for I am Lord Voldemort. Harry sat back with a bit of a smug expression on his face. Croaker had drawn the sheet of parchment back to himself and was going through the motions, just as Harry did. When he was finished, he sat back and softly said, "Well, I'll be—" The answer was right there all along. Croaker sat there thinking for a few moments before he leaned forward again. "Mr. Potter, I've now seen the memories of events of what happened at the sorting at Hogwarts this year, including the two wraiths, one each, that came out of your scar and the head of Quirinus Corolla. Both were clearly manifestations of Voldemort Riddle." Harry nodded back in understanding. "That also means," said Croaker, "through whatever feat, possibly when he was destroyed by you in October 1981, his soul became fragmented. When you entered the Great Hall on the 1st of September for the sorting, and because Quirrell was already there and possessed by one fragment of Riddle's soul, the two coming in close proximity caused the one expelled from you when your binding shattered to be drawn to the one possessing Quirrell. Him being hit by the second piece of Riddle's soul, while already under an active possession, killed him. The piece already possessing him was forced to flee and fused with the piece that came from you, Mr. Potter. Now," said Croaker, leaning forward and clasping his hands together, "the fact that the new fused piece of Riddle's soul did not then move on to the afterlife, together with the fact the prophecy is still in play, means there's still more." "The prophecy's still in play?" asked Cygnus. Croaker nodded and said, "If the prophecy had been completed, the prophecy orb would have turned dark. That it hasn't means the prophecy has not yet been completed." "So I still have to face him," said Harry worriedly. "Yes and no," said Croaker. "The prophecy states one must die by the hand of the other, but that can mean many things. For instance, you can be Minister of Magic and sign his execution warrant. He will then have died by your hand. Or we can wire him up in explosives, hand you the detonator, and you push the button. There are many ways it can be done." "So I take it, then, the Department of Mysteries will be tackling this problem?" asked Cygnus. "Volcarl, Riddle represents a viable and known threat to magical Britain," said Croaker. "So that means we have the mandate to tackle the problem. On top of that, we had the mandate during the last war, and Minister Bagnold did not rescind it after Riddle supposedly died." "Excellent," said Cygnus. Looking directly at Harry again, Croaker said, "Don't worry about the prophecy, Mr. Potter. That's my and my department's job. All you need to do is stay alive. Go and enjoy being a first year at Hogwarts. When the time comes, we'll call on you, all right?" "All right, sir," replied Harry, a lot more calmly. "Good," said Croaker firmly, as he stood up. "Please follow me and I'll lead you back out of this place." Croaker then led them back to the lifts. While they were waiting, Neville quietly asked, "Uncle Algy?" Croaker, who had redonned his cowl, asked, "Yes, Neville?" "The prophecy," it said, "born as the 7th month dies. That means it could have been me, couldn't it?" asked Neville. "I mean, Harry and I were born only a few hours apart." Not answering straight away, Croaker waited a few moments in thought before he replied, "Yes, Neville, I guess that could be true. How does that make you feel?" "Relieved that it's Harry," the boy replied before turning to Harry. "Sorry." Harry smiled back and said, "It's okay, Neville. I completely understand. How can I be angry when I, too, wish it was someone else?" Croaker did not have the heart to tell his great-nephew that he could be considered marked as his equal due to the psychological impact on him of his parents' long-term stay in St. Mungo's, or that Riddle hadn't marked him yet. Exiting the lift back in the atrium, Harry asked, "Do you mind if we head for Diagon Alley for a little while? I need to get my eyes properly checked, now that my prescription has changed." "Your prescription?" asked Cygnus. "Yeah, that's what the Muggles call it," replied Harry. "Now that my eyesight isn't being adversely affected by the soul fragment, I'd like to get them checked again and have my glasses replaced if necessary." Cygnus nodded and said, "If you think it necessary." "I do," Cygnus replied Harry. "Thank you. After fleeing to Diagon Alley, Harry led their small group to his magical optometrist. Entering, he saw the old man shopkeeper from before. "Hello, sir," said Harry. "Mr. Potter," said the shopkeeper warmly. "I had read about your little incident during the sorting. I take it your spectacles are no longer suitable." "Yes, sir," replied Harry. "If you'd be so kind, I'd like to get my eyes checked once more and possibly new spectacles." Indicating the same seat Harry had sat upon last time, he said, "Take a seat then, Mr. Potter." Harry climbed into the seat and laid back while the other three stood back and watched. After retrieving a small card of parchment from his small file cabinet, the old man came forward. "Now, let's see." He waved his wand over Harry's eyes and compared what he discovered with what was on the card. "Ah," he said. "Completely normal eyesight with a very minor affliction of hypermetropia, far-sightedness, which will not become a problem until you are older. That means you will eventually need glasses for reading. Other than that, I can see you have a familial history of myopia, short-sightedness, but you show no signs of it now. I dare say you will not suffer from it in the future. In a nutshell, Mr. Potter, you do not require spectacles at this time, and from my experience you will not need spectacles for reading until your years are quite advanced." "Thank you, sir," said Harry. "However, I'd still like to be fitted for a pair of sunglasses with the same 4 charms I had on my prescripted pair you supplied previously. Plus, I'd like a pair of plain glass ones with the same 4 charms." "You're worried about someone attempting to enter your mind, Mr. Potter?" asked the shopkeeper. "I am," replied Harry. "The headmaster is a master legilimens. I felt both him and another member of staff attempting to read my surface thoughts over the past couple of weeks. I feel the attempts and they tend to give me a slight headache. I'd rather block them completely." "Harry, legilimency upon a minor, especially one of a noble and ancient house, is illegal," said Cygnus, concerned. "I know," replied Harry. "However, passive legilimency is wandless, and there's no way to prove it. A master legilimens merely needs to look you in the eye to carry it out." Angrily, Cygnus said, "In that case, I want Daphne protected as well." The shopkeeper said, "I can fit you all with plain lenses in a very stylish frame if you'd like. The charms I can place on the glass of the lenses will block everything up to a very forceful wanded cast." Turning to Harry, Cygnus asked, "Harry, who is the other staff member you suspect?" "Severus Snape," replied Harry. "I figured out the only way he could act as a spy for Dumbledore within the Death Eaters is if he's a Master Occlumens, and if he's a Master Occlumens, it's no great stretch to also be a Master Legilimens." "Snape," growled Cygnus. Turning to his daughter, he asked, "Daphne, do you have a problem with wearing glasses while you speak with either the headmaster or Professor Snape?" "If either attempting to read my mind," asked Daphne, affronted. "Definitely not." "In that case," said the shopkeeper, "how about we peruse the shelves for something that suits?" After an hour, Harry's 2 new pairs of glasses were ready. Daphne and even Neville had selected the pairs of glasses they wanted. Neville also went for a second pair, the same style mirror-surfaced sunglasses Harry had selected, but with a different base color on the frame. Because he'd done Harry's already, the shopkeeper was able to quickly cast the required charms on the next 3 pairs, those for Daphne and Neville. Though Cygnus tried to get in first, Harry told the shopkeeper to take the payment for all 5 pairs from his personal accounts. When Cygnus tried to argue, Harry told him Daphne would soon enough be his responsibility alone. He had no problem with purchasing for her an item of eyewear that would add to her protections. And Cygnus relented. As they left the store, Harry said, "There's just one more place to stop before we go." "Oh?" asked Cygnus. With a nod, Harry said, "It was Hermione's birthday last Thursday. None of us knew of it, as she hadn't said anything to any of us. However, Padma Patal heard it from her sister, Parvati, and told me in confidence last night in the common room. So I want to buy her a birthday present before we leave, even if it will be somewhat belated." "I didn't know about Hermione's birthday," said Neville. "Me neither," said Daphne. "I know," said Harry. "I was thinking of getting her something from all of us, and people can chip in what they can afford." "And what were you thinking of getting her?" asked Daphne. "A post owl for her parents," replied Harry. "Dead useful, and it'll allow her parents to be able to send her letters and packages without having to come into here to send them via the post owl office." "That's actually a very smart gift, Harry," said Daphne. "Indeed it is," said Cygnus, "and this time you'll let us help pay for it." After visiting the Owl Emporium, Daphne selected the owl, a long-eared owl that had brown and tawny colouring with black streaks. The shopkeeper said it was a male and rather large for the breed, standing at about 14 inches in height. When asked about its range, he said it was built for long-distance travelling, so could easily fly from one end of the Isles to the other. "It's perfect," said Harry. "As it's considered a native and not a threatened species, no one will go running off to British wildlife to tattle if they see the Grangers have one roosting in their yard." Turning to the shopkeeper, he said, "We'll take it. Plus, we also need an indoor portable roost, a bag of owl treats, a small book on taking care of them, and package the whole lot up into a shrunk parcel." "Easy enough to do," said the shopkeeper. "And can I also borrow a sheet of parchment, a quill and some ink?" asked Harry. "I need to let the receiver know the owl is a gift to them." With a nod, the shopkeeper disappeared for a few moments to bring back the required writing implements. Harry, Daphne, and Neville then set about writing the letter to the Grangers. Harry remembered their address as he saw it written on the inside cover of one of Hermione's books she brought from home. Within 20 minutes, Harry carried the owl outside with the parcel and letter attached before launching it into the air above the alley. When Harry, Daphne, and Neville returned to the castle later that afternoon, they each wore their new spectacles. Cygnus saw them flewed away from Diagon Alley before leaving directly for Greengrass Estate. When Daphne was concerned they detracted from her looks, Harry gently leaned forward and, for the first time, kissed her. "Not to me, they don't," he softly said. Daphne, at first shocked, blushed and leaned forward before saying, "If I was any older, Mr. Potter, that comment would have earned you a decent snogging." "Oh?" asked Harry. "And did you have anyone in mind to award me that decent snogging?" Daphne grinned back and smacked him on the arm. "Prat!" she exclaimed. Neville, sporting his new shades, chuckled. "You're a brave man, Mr. Potter." "Ah," replied Harry, "but, thanks to our fathers, I already have the delectable Miss Greengrass firmly in my clutches." "No. Aha!" Neville laughed, while Harry earned another smack to his arm from Daphne. As they entered the main doors of the castle, they were greeted by Dumbledore himself. "I take it you have successfully concluded your business?" he asked, with his twinkle running full bore. "Yes, thank you, Headmaster," replied Harry. "And might I inquire what that business was?" asked the old man. "You may, Headmaster," replied Harry, "but as it was family business, it is none of your business." "I am the headmaster of this school, Mr. Potter," said the headmaster sternly, his twinkle now absent. "It is my responsibility to know what my students are up to when they leave the grounds." "And I told you, Headmaster," replied Harry coolly, leading the other two past and onto the stairs. "It was family business. You need not know anything else." A clearly upset Dumbledore frowned mightily in response before storming off towards his office. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Grand Sorcerer, Headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, holder of the Order of Merlin First Class, ex-Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, ex-Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, was a man unused to being so thoroughly sidelined. However, he also knew it was no one's fault but his own. In the past 2 weeks, his grand plan for the greater good of the wizarding world had been reduced to a shambles. He had lost almost all of his political power, his popularity was in ruin, his staff now questioned him over his actions. But more importantly, young Harry Potter was well and truly outside of his control. With the arrest and charges laid against his maternal aunt and uncle, the protections placed on the boy through the blood wards over Privet Drive were weakening daily, and the boy could not be forced to return there to re-strengthen them. After the trial of the Dursleys in Courtroom 5, he wouldn't have sent the boy back to them anyway. He knew the preceding 10 years were going to be dark days for the boy, what with the aunt's hatred for magic, and he expected the boy to come to school, grateful to be out from under the roof of the Dursleys for at least part of the year. He had no idea it would be as bad for him as it clearly was. He also realized the boy was right when he said it was his fault. It was bad, because he didn't find the time to go and check on his charge, and now the boy clearly and for good reason hated him for it. With a sigh, Dumbledore grasped a pinch of flue powder from his pot of it on the mantel above his fireplace. He tossed it in and called, "Potions Master's office, Hogwarts." As the flames turned green, he stuck his head within and called, "Severus." Snape, who was sitting at his personal potions workstation at the time of the call, cast a time suspension charm over the workstation before turning around to look at his fireplace. "What is it, Headmaster? I'm in the middle of brewing a new batch of homesickness cure infusion for Pomfrey." "Come to my office, please," replied Dumbledore. "We need to talk." With a grumbling sigh, Snape rose from his workstation and said, "I shall be there momentarily, Headmaster." He first placed another, longer time suspension charm over his entire workstation before turning to the door and striding out. A few minutes later, he was striding into the headmaster's office. "You wanted to see me, Headmaster?" he asked the old man. "Ah, Severus," replied Dumbledore. "Please take a seat. We have much to discuss." Covering his own sigh of frustration, the potions master took seat on the other side of Dumbledore's desk. "How well have you gained the confidence of young Miss Greengrass?" asked Dumbledore, once Snape was properly seated. "Not one jot of an iota, Albus," replied Snape. "You know that. It is imperative you regain her trust, Severus," said Dumbledore. "She is the key to regaining the trust of young Mr. Potter." "Albus, it is difficult to regain something I never had in the first place," replied Snape with a sour look. "How do you propose I do what you ask?" Dumbledore gave a dismissive wave before replying, "I'm sure you'll find a way, Severus. Our plan depends on it." "Your plan, Headmaster," replied Snape. "Not mine. We must regain young Harry's trust," said Dumbledore, ignoring Snape's response. "The future of the wizarding world depends on it." "Headmaster, I fear you're flogging a dead horse," replied Snape. "Your plans will have to continue apace without the participation of the Potter brat." "Alas, they cannot, Severus," replied Dumbledore with a sigh. "Harry Potter is the key to everything. His destiny is to face Tom. Mine is to guide him to that point in time." "I know the prophecy is everything to you, Headmaster," said Snape carefully, "but I do not recall there being a part for you to play within it." "The prophecy was told to me," replied Dumbledore. "It was told to me so that I may guide young Harry." "Perhaps it was told to you so you can train the boy, Headmaster," said Snape. "You've done nothing towards that these past 11 years. "Harry needs to enjoy his childhood," said Dumbledore with another throwaway gesture. "There will be plenty of time for him to receive training. Better to be trained early and before needed than too late and not be ready," replied Snape. "Do not question me on this, Severus," frowned Dumbledore. "I will know when it is time." Moving to rise, Snape said, "Then, if there is nothing else, Headmaster, I have potions under a time suspension charm to which I need to return before the charm ends." "Very well," sighed Dumbledore. "You may go." With cloak billowing, Snape left the office to return to his potions. Sunday. Glorious Sunday. If he hadn't planned on meeting Daphne and heading to breakfast together, Harry would have gladly had the day as a lion. But future wives wait for no man or boy. After his morning ablutions, Harry ducked straight down to the Great Hall. Surprisingly, he met Daphne just as she was coming up from the dungeons with Tracy. "Good morning, dear heart," he said. Then with only a slight hesitation said, "And you too, Daphne." Both looked gobsmacked at him, standing there grinning at the pair of them for a few moments before Tracy burst into laughter. Daphne, as usual, hit him on the arm. "Press," she said, blushing. "Good one, Potter," said Tracy, still chuckling. "You had me going there." "You know, Daphne," said Harry, wincing slightly as he massaged his arm, "if you keep hitting me like that, you're going to leave a permanent mark." "Garbage," she stated. "I'm not hitting you anywhere near hard enough for that yet." Harry looked over to see she was smirking just slightly with her nose, just right in the air. "Yet?" he asked. "Yet," she replied defiantly. Harry gave a dramatic sigh and said, "Not yet married, and already beaten into submission." As they were approaching the Ravenclaw table, their chosen destination for the morning, Tracy said, "Face it, Potter, you may be destined to be the lord of the land, but Daphne will be the lady of the manor." Helping them to their seats, Harry asked, "Manor?" Does that mean I have to buy one of those? Daphne looked at him a little shocked before she said, Harry, you're a Potter. You already have one in Wales somewhere. I dare say you also have other properties scattered around the world. Oh, said Harry, a little surprised while sitting down. I guess I should take a closer look at that large folio the goblins gave me to read then. You don't know? Asked Tracy. Harry shrugged as he reached to load his plate. I know I've got a fair bit of money and that there's a whole pile of stocks, but I've not taken the time to go through it all. Daphne set her knife and fork down and glared at him. Harry James Potter, you are the head of a noble and most ancient house. It is your responsibility to keep on top of your finances. Honestly, Harry. Well, said Harry, do you know your way around those documents then? Can you help me? I'm the heir presumptive of a noble and most ancient house, replied Daphne with a scowl. And as we're going to be married, and to which Tracy alluded, I'm destined to be Lady Potter. It's my responsibility to both houses to learn as much as I can about the finances so I may aid you. Father has taught me quite a lot over the past few years, so I will be ready when the time comes. So yes, I will help you go through the documents. Thank you, said Harry quite gratefully. I've read through a lot of it, but I've not been taught business. It's not something they taught to primary school children in Surrey. You'd be doing me a favor to help me there. No, replied Daphne, as the Potter fortune will fall to us both once we are married, it is only right I ensure you don't do something stupid and lose it all before we even give our vows in the bonding ceremony. I need to protect my assets. But still, you don't have to, said Harry, buttering a piece of toast. I'm grateful. After breakfast, Harry dashed up to the Ravenclaw tower and collected the folio he received from the goblins. He loaded it and a sheaf of parchment, some ink and a couple of quills into his book bag before returning to the Great Hall. The others were all waiting for him. Oh, hi, he said. You're all helping? We volunteered, said Neville. Like Daphne, we all, except for Hermione, have received instruction in managing the house finances. And my dad's taught me about the London Stock Exchange and the FTSE, said Hermione. The what? Asked Harry, before anyone could jump in. He had his book bag on the table, had drawn out the large folio and handed it to Daphne. The FTSE, the FTSE Financial Times Stock Exchange, explained Hermione. The FTSE is a selection of indexes that measure how the London Stock Exchange is performing overall. As such, it is a quick guide to whether the stock exchange is losing or gaining money. Okay, said Harry. I thought it was a new dance move or something. Honestly, Harry, huffed Hermione, why on earth would I be talking about a new dance move when I was talking about the London Stock Exchange? I have no idea, laughed Harry. That's why I was confused. Daphne had remained quiet and was going through the folio, slowly separating what was contained within into smaller piles. All right, she said. From what I can see so far, your father was really busy managing investments in the year leading up to October 1981. She suddenly stopped talking and looked at Harry. Sorry, she said. No, it's all right, said Harry soothingly. I've come to grips with their deaths now. Nodding, Daphne looked back down to what she was reading. Your father was busy managing investments until that time. Clearly he was making good use of the time they were in hiding. According to this, she said, tapping the sheet in front of her, he made quite a few significant movements of funds from out of the wizarding world into the Muggle world stock exchanges. From this, it is clear he believed the wizarding economy was either in the process of collapsing or would soon collapse. However, he made the movements over a period of about a year, never too much at one time. Reaching across to one of the piles, she handed it to Hermione. These are the stocks he purchased in the Muggle world during that time, and just before, as well as the existing stocks he owned at the time. Hermione eagerly accepted the pile and started going through it, but before she went too far, she reached into Harry's bag and snagged for herself a couple sheets of parchment, ink and a quill. Soon she was writing down columns of information. However, said Daphne, he didn't only choose stocks in the Muggle world. He didn't abandon the wizarding economy completely. He also purchased and sold stocks and business interests in the wizarding world. These are what he purchased here and abroad. She passed that large stack off to Neville. He split it between himself, Hannah, and Susan. Together they also snagged some parchment and a quill. They shared ink with Hermione. He also divested himself of a lot of monetary bonds and bought overseas currency, she said, passing a pile to Tracy. And finally, he purchased a great deal of overseas and local commercial property, moving the pile closer to herself. These last few pages are a financial summary of your total holdings, she said, passing the remainder to Harry. You need to acquaint yourself with that. Curious, Harry picked up the sheets of parchment Daphne had passed to him. He didn't see them when he was going through the folio. That's when he realized they were on the bottom. That surprised him, as the Muggles liked to keep that sort of information on top, so it was both easy to find and explained the rest. From what Harry read, the pot of fortune was staggering in its size. His view of the vaults, the first day he visited Gringotts, and the gold within represented only a tiny fraction of the Potter wealth. Nearly all of it was invested in either stocks, property, or businesses, both home and abroad. "All right," said Harry eventually, feeling a little woozy. "All right. This is incredible." Nodding, Daphne said, "All right, let's hear it. Hermione, you want to go first?" After the group had sifted through all the information before them, Hermione was almost jumping in her seat in excitement. "Harry's right. This is incredible." Looking to Harry, she said, "Your father was clearly being advised by your mother and others who knew the Muggle world really well. He made a few really good stock purchases, and a couple of absolutely brilliant ones. Firstly, whoever advised him to invest in both Microsoft and Apple computers did really well for the Potter family. I won't know how well until I can get my dad to send me a copy of the Financial Times, but the returns are constant and profitable from Apple computers and are surging really well from Microsoft. You want to keep both of those, so don't let the goblins sell them on your behalf. There's also stock here for a couple of other telecommunications companies that are returning decent profits. One, however, you may want the goblins to divest you of. I've circled that one for you. Other than that, there's a few here that are what are called blue ribbon companies. That means they will maintain steady and healthy returns unless something drastic happens, such as another global war. There's also a few startups he invested in that I suspect have since collapsed, but a few seem to be sustaining themselves for the moment. All in, she concluded, this is a very good and diverse portfolio of Muggle stocks that only requires a minor amount of tweaking. I'll be able to give you a better report once I get a copy of the Financial Times. Thank you, Hermione, said Daphne before she turned to Neville and company. Neville? With a nod in recognition, Neville explained. James Potter was thinking long-term here. He purchased a number of businesses that owned their own properties, so if the business collapsed due to the war, he would still own the land on which the business sat. In some cases, the land and building was worth more than the business itself. Here in magical Britain, Harry now holds the deed to the land for a significant portion of Diagon Alley, Nocturne Alley, Hogsmeade, and MacDonald Street in Inverness. He also holds the deed to the land for a few businesses in Rue de Magique in Paris, Assistance Starbe in Berlin, and Brugas Manera in Madrid. A few others are scattered around in Magical Salem in the US, Magical Australia, and Magical Japan. All of them are returning a healthy and steady return. Susan took over. As for magical businesses, Harry owns a moderate share in. The significant ones in Britain are the Daily Prophet, 25%, Flourish and Blots, 25%, The Leaky Cauldron, 12.5%, Quality Quidditch Supplies, 10%, and Magical Menagerie, 10%. They're all in Diagon Alley. In Nocturne Alley, you own a pub called the Warlock's Curse, and there's a note here we shouldn't have probably read that states the proprietor there, back in 1980 and 81, was providing intelligence to the Order via the goblins through a Dropbox. In Hogsmeade, you actually own the Shrieking Shack outright. Honeydukes, 20%, Gladrags, 10%, Scrivenshafts, 10%, and Dervish and Banges, 5%. There are others, but I'll let you go through this to decide for yourself what is and isn't important. However, none of the businesses are currently running at a loss. In all of the businesses, you're currently acting as a silent partner. However, with the percentages you hold, you can become more active in a lot of them should you desire to do so. Daphne gave a few nods before turning to Tracy. Trace? She asked. Harry owns quite a few bonds that can now be cashed out in a lot of the Wizarding World's currency, replied Tracy. They include war bonds for the galleon and treasury bonds for France's argent, Spain's dinero, Germany's geld, and the America's franklin, to name a few. The sums are quite significant. The most telling is the war bonds. The ministry effectively owes the Potters well over 2 million galleons. If Harry was to cash in the lot in one fell swoop, it would probably bankrupt the ministry right there and then. I doubt they'd be able to pay it back, even though they're required to do it immediately. And that leaves me, said Daphne, turning to her own stack. As I've already mentioned, the Potters own a manor. It's in Merlin's Bridge, near Haverfordwest, Pembrokeshire, Wales. There's Potter's Cottage in Godric's Hollow, which was bought only about 18 months before. And which has been claimed by the ministry as a place of historical interest, but nothing here that says they've legally purchased it. There's Lily's Pad, which sits above Scribulous Ever-Changing Inks in Diagon Alley, and the building known as the Shrieking Shack in Hogsmeade. That's all the ones in magical Britain. Overseas, in Europe, there's a chateau in France on the south coast near the town of Toulon called La Retraite du Portier, Potter's Retreat, and, peculiarly, a winter house in Australia on the east coast in the town of Byron Bay, simply called the Winter House. Those look like the private residences for the Potters. On top of those, there's quite a few investment properties the Potters own that are rented out. All bar 2 are in the Wizarding World. The 2 that are not are a house in Spinner's End near Weston-super-Mare, and a house in the township of Little Whinging in Surrey. Let me guess, sighed Harry. The one in Little Whinging is rented out by a family by the name of Dursley. Daphne, a little surprised, rummaged through the property reports before she looked up and said, Got it in one. When were the 2 places in the Muggle world purchased? Asked Harry. Daphne rummaged a bit more and said, Both properties were acquired in March 1978. According to this, Lily Evans purchased half of the property in Spinner's End off her sister after already owning half of it. They were co-owners on the death of her maternal mother. A week earlier, James Potter purchased the house in Little Whinging. The Dursleys have been the only tenants. Both purchases were handled by the same Muggle law firm. And when was Lily's Pad purchased? Asked Harry. Daphne flipped through the documents before replying. June. Thinking, Harry said. All right. It looks like my maternal grandparents, the Evanses, died shortly before March 1977. My mum and Aunt Petunia were left their house as co-owners. The sisters did not want to own the house together, so it was organized for my mum to buy off Aunt Petunia her share. My aunt and uncle married in May 1978. They immediately moved into the house in Little Whinging that my father had purchased only a short time earlier. I wonder what the arrangement was there. Harry, this means you were their landlord, said Daphne. With a snort, Harry asked, What are they paying in rent? £1 per month, replied Daphne. Whatever that is. Current exchange rate holds at about £5 per galleon, replied Harry. A British pound is currently worth about 3 sickles, 11 knuts. That's all? Exclaimed Daphne. She searched back through the documents and found a contract. Reading through it, she said, This is a contract on the property in Little Whinging. Here it says the property is lined. In March 1997, Petunia Dursley nee Evans has first option on purchasing the property at its original purchase price. The only stipulations is that it cannot be passed on to her heirs if she dies prior to March 1997, and that the condition of the property must be maintained in at least as good a condition as it was when first purchased. Well, God damn it, growled Harry. What's wrong, Harry? Asked Daphne. While it may mean there'll be a slight loss due to the loss of monies that could have been made from the monies invested in purchasing the property, you don't actually lose anything out of the arrangement other than interest which would have been gained on the original monies involved. I was the one who maintained the house for them, he growled. I was the one who did all the chores around the house, including maintaining it in that good condition. Most of my chores were around things like painting the house each year, weeding the gardens, mowing the lawns, cleaning and repainting the paths, painting the interior door frames and walls. Hell, I even re-wallpapered the interior walls once. I was their landlord and owner of the house, and they used me to meet the conditions of their stupid contract that would allow them to purchase the house from me at the original purchase price." He sighed and said, "I bet they were laughing to themselves over it the whole time." "Well, they're not laughing now," said Daphne, "and if the house isn't being maintained, you can take it back off them. We'll just have to wait to see what the Muggle legal system does to them first." "I can't kick them out already?" he asked. With a small shake of her head, she replied, "No, they've paid their rent in advance, right up to March 9th. "Damn," replied Harry. "Anyway," said Daphne in an attempt to change the subject, "we now know the House of Potter is in an excellent financial situation. There may be a few shares that need to be sold off, and maybe some more purchased, plus the various personal properties around the world need to be checked over, but everything is otherwise in a good condition. I suggest, Harry," she said, looking straight at him, "we organize for a time to go to the properties and have a good look over them. These documents don't show if any of the properties are in stasis or not, though I suspect they all are, but we need to check them anyhow." Harry nodded and said, "They've been like they are since October 1981 at least. I think they can wait until Christmas holidays. We may even be able to make an excursion of it." "And I think that's enough of the finances for now," said Daphne, indicating for everyone to pass her the paperwork. "You and I will need to just go for a walk and talk sometime later. You're looking quite stressed." After Daphne had reorganized all the paperwork and placed them back in the folio, Harry collected all the spare parchment, ink and quills and pocketed the lot into his book bag. "All right then," he said. "Shall we adjourn to the library afterwards?" "Library?" said Hermione. "We've a couple of hours before lunch. If we get homework out of the way, then lunch we can help with getting the club ready." "Any dissent?" asked Daphne. No one disagreed, and they all rose from the table. Harry looked at his friends and said, "To you all, thank you very much for your help. I really appreciate it." They all smiled back, and Susan said, "That was actually a lot of fun." As they were about to leave, Hermione asked, "Harry, can I borrow Hedwig?" "Sure," he said, before asking, "Why?" "I want to send a letter to my dad asking if he can forward on a copy of the Financial Times," she replied. "That way we'll know just what all those shares in Muggle businesses you own are worth." Harry grinned and replied, "Sure, why not?" The seven made their way out of the Great Hall to collect homework notes to recongregate in the library. After meeting again in the library, Harry and Hermione walked in to meet Daphne. Tracy, Susan and Hannah had already beaten them there. Neville came in a short while later, and "Here's where we see the disadvantage of our houses being in the upper reaches of the castle," said Neville. "You have so much further to go to get things you need." "At least it's warmer up there," replied Tracy. "I shudder to think just how cold it's going to get down in the snake den when winter is fully upon us." "So, what's first?" asked Hermione eagerly. "Settle, Hermione," said Susan. "It's homework." "But I like homework," replied Hermione. After a bit of good-natured ribbing, the seven were soon working on various assignments. A couple of hours later, Neville sat back and said, "That's me done, I think." Susan and Hannah said, "Us too." "Harry?" asked Daphne. "Hmm?" replied Harry, his nose in a book. "You're often the first of us finished," she said. "What are you reading?" "Oh," he replied, setting the book down. "Just something on something called Blood Wards. I wanted to see if there was a specific reason Dumbledore insisted on me being placed at the Dursleys." "Find anything?" asked Hermione. With a shake of his head, Harry replied, "Not yet. At least, nothing that would specifically mean I'd be placed at the Dursleys. I think it might have a lot to do with how my aunt is my closest living blood relative. Otherwise, there would be far stronger wards that could be placed on a wizarding home over a Muggle home." "You did say Dumbledore also placed you there so you wouldn't grow up knowing you were famous," said Susan. "True," replied Harry. "But that doesn't mean I couldn't have grown up outside of Wizarding Britain. I'm sure, as he was Supreme Mugwump, he could have found a home for me in another country where being the boy who lived wasn't that much of a big deal." Shaking his head, he said, "No, there was something about Aunt Petunia that made him do it. I'm sure of it." "I'm sure you'll find it, Harry," said Daphne soothingly, "but I think it's time for lunch." With agreement around the table, the seven packed up, As Harry had already packed away his things, he carried the text that had been brought to the table over the past couple of hours and returned them to their shelves. After lunch, the seven separated. Harry led Daphne to the entrance hall. Just before they arrived, he asked, "Do you think you're going to need your cloak? We can always head down to the dungeons, so you can collect it before we head outside." With a shake of her head, she replied, "No. As long as we stay away from the lake, I think I'll be fine." Harry merely nodded, and after accepting her hand in the crook of his elbow, escorted her outside for a walk around the grounds. The next morning, the seven were sitting at the Hufflepuff table, finishing their breakfasts. When the mail came in, Harry was very quick to spot Hermione's parents' new owl. He almost didn't see the large barn owl that landed in front of himself. Untying the shrunken package, Harry could see it was redirected via the post office before being sent on to him. It was the package that contained the costume he'd ordered, plus the catalogue. Hermione was casually talking to the owl before her complimenting it on its plumage as she was untying a package from each of its legs. The seven were each surreptitiously smiling at each other as they watched her work. Neville even reached over with a piece of bacon and handed it to the bird, who, as soon as one of its legs was free of its burden, proceeded to use its talons to eat it. As soon as its legs were free, the owl moved to sit on Hermione's shoulder, startling the girl in the process. Hermione opened the first box and drew from it a small bracelet and a letter on Muggle stationery. In shock, she opened the letter and quietly read it with one hand while holding the bracelet in the other. After a few moments, Harry and the others watched as she gasped, before turning to look more closely at the owl. "Hello, Rocket," she sniffled to the bird. The owl hooted softly in reply, giving itself a little ruffle of feathers. Returning to her letter, she looked more closely at the bracelet. The others watched as tears fell from Hermione's eyes. She sniffed and carefully folded the letter before placing it within her robes. Only then did she look around the others. "Who?" she stuttered, before taking a deep breath and trying to center herself. "Who was responsible for buying my parents an owl?" Neville grinned and said, "We all were. Harry was a little upset we didn't know it was your birthday last Thursday because you didn't tell us. So he thought the nicest belated present we could get you was an owl for your parents. This way," said Hannah, "your parents are going to be able to contact you when they want to, or need to, instead of having to go into Diagon Alley or wait until you send a letter to them." "We all put money into buying it," said Daphne, "together with a portable roost, some owl treats and a small booklet on how to care for a post owl. And Daphne selected the breed of owl based on its ability to be able to cover long distances in flight, and its ability to carry pretty weighty parcels," said Harry. "And it looks adorable," said Daphne a bit smugly. "What's its name?" asked Susan. "Part of the gift is that your parents needed to name it." "They named him Rocket," replied Hermione, still sniffling a little, "and they said to make sure I said thank you to you all for such an amazing gift. And I'm sorry I didn't tell you about my birthday. I've never had friends who bought me a present before, so I didn't think it was important." She then carefully rose from her seat and hugged each of the others while softly saying thank you. Susan was closest and first, so she handed the girl a handkerchief. "I just don't want my school robe stained with tears," she grinned. Sitting down again, Hermione lifted the owl off her shoulder and fed it another slice of bacon while she looked it over. "He's absolutely gorgeous," she softly said. "Well, if you're not going to give it a return letter," said Neville after a few moments, "you'd best release it so it can fly back to your parents." "Oh," said Hermione, a little startled in realization. "I'll just dash off a quick note letting them know I received the packages, thanked you all, and that I'll write to them when I've got more time to do so." After a quick couple of minutes of writing, Hermione folded up the parchment upon which she was writing and tied it to the owl's leg. It immediately took to the air. She watched it the whole time until it disappeared into the enchanted ceiling. Breakfast was winding up, and many students had already left. They headed off to their first classes for the week. In the case of Ravenclaw and Gryffindor, that was charms with Professor Flitwick. On the way, Hermione, who was walking between Harry and Neville, asked Harry, "So, all that stuff about attending family business, it wasn't just so you could buy me an owl, was it?" No, that was actual family business, replied Harry. We just stopped in at the Owl Emporium on our way through Diagon Alley. Mum and Dad also told me why you sent Rocket to them, even though he's my gift, she said. It's very considerate of you all, and dead clever. Neville, in a moment of clarity, said, It wasn't the owl that was our gift to you, Hermione. It was the ability for your parents to be able to keep in contact with you that was the true gift. Since they can now keep in contact with you, they'll be less worried about you, and you'll be less worried about them not being able to get in contact with you if an emergency or some such crops up back home. And that makes you happier. That earned Neville another hug. This time it came with a kiss on the cheek. However, said Harry, at Christmas your present from me, at least, will be all you. Thank you, she softly said. Now all each of us has to figure out, said Harry, pretending to be thinking really hard, is what sort of gift to buy you that doesn't have pages within. That earned him a grin and a smack on the arm before she gave him a big hug. Then she turned on Neville and gave him another. When she released him, she said to them, You people are the best friends. Dashing too, said Harry, smirking at Neville. And handsome, said Neville. Don't forget handsome. Oh, you two, stamped Hermione, trying to frown and stop from laughing. Honestly, she couldn't hold her laughter back anymore and laughed aloud. After class, Harry asked Neville to find him the Weasley twins for him. Frowning a little in confusion, he asked, Why do you want to see them? I'm setting up a prank and managed to get them to agree to help me, replied Harry. I figured if we can work with them on pranks, we're less likely to be the target of theirs.
That's brilliant,
said Neville, not with a little wonder in his voice. What's the prank? Who's it aimed at? Can I help? Harry laughed and replied, Whoa, Neville, slow down a little. The prank is, I'm going to dress as a character out of a Muggle movie. Dumbledore would not recognize the character, but I think every Muggle-born will. The prank will, in effect, make Dumbledore think I'm going completely dark, while the Muggle-borns will know for a fact I'm just pranking Dumbledore. I'm going to put it in the Great Hall just as dinner starts, so there will be lots of witnesses. The Muggle-borns will recognize the character immediately, so I'm hoping they'll let the magically raised at their tables know it's a big prank. At lunch, Harry was sitting with the others at the Slytherin table when one of the twins' dorm mates walked over and handed him a note. Moving it down to his lap, he opened it and read, Harrikins, meet us in the antechamber you were in immediately prior to the sorting, straight after lunch. GNF. Folding the note back up, Harry shoved it into one of his pockets. What's going on? Asked Daphne, having noticed the note. In a near whisper, he replied, The twins are working with me on a prank aimed at Dumbledore. I need to meet them right after lunch and before next class. What's your next class again? She asked. Afternoon nap time, otherwise known as History of Magic, he replied. Well, I would say don't be late for the class, but I don't think that's possible, she sighed. I think the entire class could be unattended and Binns wouldn't notice. As soon as he'd finished his lunch, Harry told the others he needed to talk to someone for a few minutes and asked Neville to escort Hermione to the next class alone. Then he quickly left the hall. Entering the entrance hall antechamber, he noticed the twins were already there and waiting. Hi, mates, he said before pulling from his pocket the still shrunken package. A quick tap with the tip of his wand and the package was returned to normal size. He quickly resheathed his wand and pulled the package open to reveal the costume he'd ordered. Surprising, even to him, the costume came with the boots and gloves. He pulled it out of the box and let the box fall to the floor before asking the twins, Recognize this? No, wait, said one of them. That's what one of those people on that poster Lee has on his bedroom wall is wearing. Oh, yes, replied the other. Now I recognize it. I take it Lee is a Muggle-born? Asked Harry. No, he's a half-blood, said one. But Muggle-raised, said the other. And his home is a Muggle home? Asked Harry. Oh, yes, replied one. Did you watch television while you were there? Asked Harry. The box with the moving pictures? Asked one. That was fun, said the other. Yes, replied Harry. This costume is a copy of the one worn by a character that appeared in a movie. I was wondering if you'd seen that movie on the television while you were there. Nope, replied one. Don't remember it, replied the other. But I bet Lee will, said Harry. Are you guys heading back to your common room soon? Yep, replied one. We have yet to collect our books for our next class. All right, said Harry. Can I hand this costume off to the two of you to take back to your dorm, show it to Lee, and ask him to charm it to play a piece of orchestral music whenever the person wearing it is walking? We can do that, said one. What's the piece of music? Asked the other. He'll know, replied Harry. I'm also going to need it fitted with an auto-sizing charm to make it fit me, if you can do that. Easily done, replied one. When do you plan on pulling the prank? Asked one. As soon as you've managed to charm the costume and can get it back to me, I'll probably pull it that night at dinner, replied Harry. All right, Harrigan, said one. Leave it to us, said the other. Harry left the package with them and quickly made his way to the History of Magic classroom. He managed to walk in just behind the last person to enter. He took seat next to Hermione. Why are you late? She asked. I told you, he replied. I needed to talk to someone. About what? She asked. Harry sighed and said, I'm pulling a prank on Dumbledore and the Weasley twins are helping me do it. Harry, you'll get in trouble, she quietly exclaimed. Yes, he shrugged, but trust me, it'll be worth it. The seven sat the Gryffindor table for dinner. Not long after they did, Harry was passed a note from the twins, showed the costume to Lee and told him what you want done. He told us he knew the required piece of music once he stopped laughing hysterically. Now we're really curious. He won't tell us what's so funny either. We should have the costume ready for you within a couple of days. Infringing. As he was refolding the note and sticking it in his pocket, Harry looked down the table. He caught the eye of a dark-skinned kid with dreadlocks who was grinning back. The boy threw him a thumbs-up gesture. Hello, Lee, thought Harry, smiling back. Seeing the expression on Harry's face, Neville frowned, leaned forward from the other side of the table, and asked, What's going on between you and Lee Jordan? Harry also leaned forward and softly said, Lee is best mates with the twins. He's helping me with a couple of charms I need for my prank on Dumbledore. You know you're going to get detention, right? Asked Neville. With a bit of an evil grin, Harry replied, No, I don't think so. I think Dumbledore will come out of this willing to give me anything I want so long as I promise not to go dark. You're going to pull a massive and very public prank on the headmaster, and you don't expect to get detention for it? Asked Neville. This I have to see. Harry laughed and said, I'm just playing to Dumbledore's greatest fear. He's going to freak. As promised, a couple of days later, just as Harry was about to meet the seven in the entrance hall on their way to dinner, Lee approached him. The costume is ready and in the antechamber off the entrance hall. Do you know the one? He asked. Yeah, it's the same one I met with the twins to get the costume to you, replied Harry. Nodding, Lee grinned and said, If I may suggest, wait until the Great Hall is full and the meal is served, then make your big dramatic entrance. That's the plan, replied Harry. However, I'm not going to know when that is. I've got that covered, said Lee. I can see the door to the antechamber from where I sit at the Gryffindor table. I've been practicing a knock jinx that will allow me to knock on the door from where I sit. That'll be your cue. Grinning, Harry said, and the final piece of the puzzle falls into place. Excellent, Mr. Jordan, and thank you very much. Harry joined the others and said, You folks go on in. I need to get ready for my prank on Dumbledore. You're still going ahead with it, then? Asked Daphne. With an emphatic nod, he replied, Yes, this should prove very interesting. Daphne gave him a quick peck on the cheek as the others started heading off. She quickly joined them. Harry paused for a moment before he gave a quick grin and ducked down to the antechamber. Once inside, he quickly closed and latched the door before turning to see the opened package sitting on the floor. He quickly stripped down to his underwear and hoped no one decided to be adventurous and have a look inside. Quickly dressing into the costume, he waited until he felt it resized to fit him like a glove. He cast the cantrip that would make his cloak billow, the one to make his hair lay better, the one that gave him the twinkle in his eyes, and finally the one to make his teeth sparkle when he smiled. He knew it was overkill, but he was going for overkill. Lastly, he stood with the helmet tucked under his left arm, waiting and hoping the knock would come soon. It did, right then. A little surprised at his anticipation, Harry waited a few moments before donning the helmet with the mirrored eye openings, opening the door and marching out. As soon as he started to move, the Imperial March broke in. In the great hall, all eyes turned to the double doors as soon as the music started. Harry entered, and without breaking stride, marched with his head held high up between the tables towards the head table. Out of the corner of his eyes, he noticed quite a few wide grins on some faces. Faces that also turned to those sitting either side of them and whispering. The muggle raised were telling their table mates just who Harry was dressed as. Almost perfectly on a break in the music, Harry came to a halt on the open space in front of the head table. He paused a moment to take in the looks of shock on the faces of some professors, and dropped to one knee with his head bowed. Lifting his head to look in Dumbledore's stunned face, he said through the voice-altering charm the twins had placed on it, "I, Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith, present myself to you, Emperor Dumbledore." "What?" spluttered Dumbledore, visibly flinching. "Dark Lord, Emperor—" "I said," began Harry Vader, before he rose and said, "I was informed, Emperor, you would be conducive to an audience." "What?" spluttered Dumbledore. "I'm not an emperor." "Ha! You jest, my lord," retorted Harry Vader, before he pointed a finger at Dumbledore. "Who else but an emperor would seat themselves upon a throne made of gold?" "No," exclaimed Dumbledore. "This is the seat of the headmaster. I'm not an emperor." "Well," snarled Harry Vader imperiously, playing it right up with as much flourishing as possible, he said, "I came here hoping to forge an alliance between my forces and your own. I believed that together we would become masters of the universe. Clearly I was mistaken. I am left with no choice but to crush you under the heel of my boot. Good day, sir." Quickly, Harry Vader spun about, threw his nose, breathing apparatus, into the air, and stormed back out. The Imperial March echoed through the hall. As he passed the doors, one of the twins banished the doors closed for him. "No," Harry heard the headmaster call out as the doors closed. Quickly, he dashed across the entrance hall and back into the antechamber. Hurrying, he changed back out of the costume and into his Hogwarts robes before ducking back out of the room. Harry left the great hall amidst riotous laughter and merriment. The head table was all afluster. Still, quietly he ducked back into the hall and, staying crouched, made his way between the Gryffindor and Ravenclaw tables to take seat next to Daphne. No one at the head table appeared to have spotted him come in or find his seat. Hermione, trying to stifle her laughter, had tears in her eyes and was red in the face. She couldn't even look at Harry. Daphne looked at him with her eyes twinkling and said, "I think you broke the headmaster." "Why? What happened?" asked Harry, trying to act innocent. Neville replied, "Madame Pomfrey had to escort him from the hall out the teacher's door. I think she was taking him back to his office." He looked pretty shaken up. Harry looked up at the head table and noticed Professor Flitwick was looking at him and grinning like a loon. Professor Snape was sitting with his head down and a slight smirk was on his face. He was trying to hide. Professor McGonagall was sitting with her elbows on the table and her hands covering her face. The slight jiggling of her shoulders informed anyone paying attention she was trying hard not to laugh aloud. As the hall calmed back down and returned to their meals, a couple of Gryffindors whispered to Harry and the others, "Great prank, Harry." At the end of the meal, Professor Flitwick came over and, still grinning, said, "That was very well done, Mr. Potter. Maybe now the headmaster will get rid of that infernal chair he favours so much. Oh, and 5 points to Ravenclaw for a prank really well done that caused no actual harm and could not be called bullying." "Thank you, Professor," Harry warmly replied. Chuckling, the diminutive professor turned away and said, "Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith," and burst into full laughter again. Said Harry, turning back to his friends. "I think Professor Flitwick is a closet sci-fi fan." "Sci-fi?" asked Tracy, grinning but clearly puzzled. "Short for science fiction," replied Hermione. "It's a muggle thing." "Oh," replied Tracy, clearly still not understanding. "If you say so." The twins and Lee approached next. "Bloody marvellous, old chap," said one. "Yes, indeed," said the other. "That was even better than I thought it would be," said Lee, grinning away. When Harry was finally able to get away from all his new well-wishers and those who wanted to congratulate him, he finally managed to return to the Ravenclaw common room with the package tucked safely under his arm. He underwent another round of congratulatory remarks before he was finally able to head to his dorm and put the package away. The next evening, Harry found himself summoned to the headmaster's office. Professor Flitwick once more accompanied him, along with Daphne. As they approached the gargoyle, Professor Flitwick gave the password, and the gargoyle leapt out of their path. The stairs were already revolving upwards. Both Daphne and Harry donned their plain glasses as the stairs ascended. The three entered the office to find Dumbledore behind his desk, with Snape standing brooding in the corner. "Ah, Harry," said Dumbledore jovially. "So good of you to come." "What is this about, Headmaster?" asked Harry in a no-nonsense tone. "I wanted to talk to you about that little prank you pulled at dinner last night," replied Dumbledore. "Won't you please take a seat?" Harry, seeing only one chair present, indicated for Daphne to sit while he stood just behind her and off to the side. "Clearly I cannot, sir," replied Harry. "As with the last time we attended, there is a distinct lack of seating available." Snape started to say something, but apparently thought better of it. He shut his mouth with an almost audible snap of his teeth. Dumbledore almost distractedly waved his wand, and a second seat appeared alongside Daphne's, matching her own. Without a word, Harry sat. Then he looked back at Dumbledore, waiting for the man to say something. After a quiet few minutes that stretched long enough to be uncomfortable, Dumbledore finally said, "That was a masterful prank you pulled last night, Harry." "Why, thank you, Albus," replied Harry. "The school populace seemed to think so." With a frown, Dumbledore said, "It's Headmaster Dumbledore, Harry." "Right back," Harry calmly replied. "It's Mr. Potter, Albus. I figured if you wanted to be overly familiar with the use of my given name, you wouldn't be upset if I used yours in the same manner. Did we not have this discussion the last time you summoned me?" Harry could see Snape sitting in the corner, itching to say his piece, and scowling away. Frowning for a few moments, Dumbledore seemed to collapse a little into himself. "Mr. Potter, I was hoping we could restart our acquaintance and become closer now that the difficulties of your living with your Muggle relatives is concluded. The legality surrounding me being unlawfully placed with the Dursleys may be concluded, Headmaster," said Harry, "but the psychological and physical impact of their treatment of me has a long way to go before I would even dream of considering it, as you put it, concluded. The physical damage to my body may be almost repaired, and I may consider that done and dusted before too much longer, but the psychological damage," he sighed, "I suspect that is going to take many, many years, if ever, for me to come to full terms with." "Can't you see beyond that, Harry?" begged Dumbledore. "Everyone should be given a second chance." "A second chance to kill me, you mean, Albus?" asked Harry. "The Dursleys had 10 years to show remorse and change their ways. They failed every opportunity given to them, and only a naive fool would think them capable of changing their ways after so long." "I meant me, Harry," said Dumbledore. "I admit it was a grave mistake on my part to place you with the Dursleys, but you were safe from the magical world there. My intentions were good and just." Thinking a moment, Harry said, "Aldous Huxley, a novelist from earlier this century, once said, 'Hell isn't merely paved with good intentions, it's walled and roofed with them.'" "Yes, and furnished too." And Albert Camus, a French philosopher, said, "The evil that is in the world almost always comes of ignorance, and good intentions may do as much harm as malevolence if they lack understanding. You lacked properly understanding what my relatives were capable of. It was a mistake that would have killed me if not for my bouts of accidental magic and self-healing," replied Harry. "There were quite a few times that, had I not been born a wizard, should have killed me. Know your mistakes. Multiple were not that you just placed me with the Dursleys when you had no right to do so, nor understood how they would react to me for my very presence. No, your other mistakes were not regularly coming and checking up on me, not having my placement properly registered as you were legally bound to do, and not teaching me my proper place in the wizarding world. Then there's the ones I know you did, but have not been pursued through the courts over, and only because I see no benefit for myself. There clearly must be an owl ray direction or blockage ward placed on either me or on Privet Drive, and it can only be you who put it there. That's illegal. Included in that, you blocked my mail from Gringotts. That's a breach of the treaty. You never took me in for my mandatory inoculations against wizarding diseases such as dragonpox, scrofungulus, and vanishing sickness. That's recognized as child abuse in wizarding Britain, each case. And finally, you currently have in your possession property that rightfully belongs to House Potter. You were obliged to return to me on the passing of my father, and have not. That's theft. Leaning forward, Harry said, "You need to atone and show true remorse for all those matters, Albus, plus others I didn't mention, and of which I know you're fully aware. And you can make a good start by returning my property to me without further prompting. Until you recognize and publicly accept your crimes against me and atone for them, you have no right to ask for forgiveness for them. You will not have deserved it. And, as I mentioned in our previous meeting, I'll also need a full accounting from you as to why you did the things you did, and none of that sidestepping of the question you employed in the courts, either. You cannot expect me to consider forgiveness if you're not willing to come clean. You can start with why you took a personal, some might say unhealthy, interest in me in particular, when there were a great many orphans created by Voldemort and his Death Eaters you otherwise ignored. You want my forgiveness, Albus. Earn it." Harry then sat back and waited. After a few moments, Dumbledore sighed and with a note of sadness said, "You are of course correct, Harry. You have given me a lot to think about, and I shall be up at nights doing just that. You have sacrificed a lot for the wizarding world." "I have sacrificed nothing, Albus. Everything was stolen from me." With a second sigh, the old man said, "Thank you for your time, Harry." Recognizing the dismissal, Harry rose and assisted Daphne to her feet. "Take down that mail redirection ward immediately, Albus, tonight. Otherwise, have a good evening, Headmaster," he said, as he led Daphne and Professor Flitwick from the room. After the door closed behind them, Snape said, "The brat might be arrogant, but he's right, you know." "I know," said Dumbledore sadly. "However, there are a great many things he is not yet ready to hear. And if you leave out even one thing and he knows of it, he'll never trust you again," said Snape. Nodding, Dumbledore said, "Thank you, Severus," effectively dismissing the potions master. Out in the hallway beyond the gargoyle, Professor Flitwick walked with the two back towards the main part of the castle. Daphne had her hand firmly in Harry's elbow and was almost hard up alongside him. The professor said to Harry, "You've also given me a lot to think about, Mr. Potter." "Yes, Professor, I suspected as much," replied Harry. "May I discuss with other members of staff what you discussed with the headmaster tonight?" asked the professor. "If you wish, Professor," replied Harry. "Nothing I said you should construe as a secret." "Thank you, Mr. Potter," said the half-goblin just as they arrived back at the grand staircase. "I take it you're safe to find your own ways back to your common rooms from here?" "Yes, thank you, Professor," replied Harry while Daphne nodded in agreement. "Then I shall bid you good night," he said, giving a short bow before leaving. "It's still quite early," said Daphne. "I suspect the others will be in the library. Shall we see if they're there?" Harry nodded and said, "Sounds like a good idea to me." As they walked towards the library, Daphne suddenly ducked to the side of the hallway, dragging Harry with her. She opened a door, dragging Harry in behind her. It looked like a disused classroom. As soon as Harry regained his balance from almost being dragged off his feet, Daphne spun him towards her, grabbed each side of his head, and planted a long kiss on his lips. When she let him go, Harry staggered back half a step and looked back at her in shock. "What was that for?" "That, Harry, was for both keeping yourself calm and speaking so eloquently back there in the headmaster's office," she replied. "You make me so proud to be your betrothed." Quite befuddled, it took Harry a few moments to respond. "I guess I need to do that more often then," he stammered. "Definitely," she replied with a smile.